All right. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm President Sunday. I'm a political scientist, by which I mean I have a bachelor's degree in political science and a minor in religious studies, and who the f cares? That's all you got to know, really. Um, so I'm again, I'm still like brain blasted by how long it took to even get to this point, to be totally honest with you.
My
Um,
apologies.
I understand it's very late for you. Well, we're in the same time zone, but you know, you've been streaming for a long period of time. I've just been sitting. Um,
Please
do you
tell
have a
chat your
preference on how to
preferred
proceed?
please tell chat your preferred pronouns.
I thought it was kind of obvious. It's President El Presidente, or God's a little overly on the nose, but I'll accept it.
It'll really
Um,
depend on how the convo goes. They'll call anyone a god if they make me look bad. They want to join in the rapturous condemnation.
well, that's what I'm banking on, but it's pretty early, so I wanted to like keep things cordial.
Hit it up.
How do you want to proceed with this? I mean, you know my contention already, and I'm honestly I've lost steam with respect to maintaining it simply because of the monumental stupidity by every single person who has orbited it. So I don't know, man. Like,
Yeah, even if I
I
agreed with you, I'd hate to be in your shoes because it's in your position, it's like everyone else is making a worse version of your argument, which cheapens your argument by proximity. Well, for what it's worth, I will not, or at least I will try not to let that affect me. Um, I'll I'll provide the premises, and you can provide the rebuttal, and then we can get right into
that
it.
works.
Okay. So, Professor Flowers is a person, and we talked, and it seems like she is of the opinion that uh and this is specifically in reference to South Africa. That's what we were talking about, but I believe this logic extends broadly. That if a group has been colonized historically and are then freed from their colonization, and this can happen in a myriad number of ways, but assuming they have the right to decide whether or not they want to live with their oppressors. So my reading of this is that in people who were oppressed have a right to decide whether or not to either make their oppressors move away or to kill them.
I think
Now,
that's a. I'm going to jump in right there if that's all right, because I think that's a misreading right off the
well,
bat.
I don't. I'm only providing my assertions here, but I'm happy to let you tear them through as much as you want when you're done, because I only want to talk my impression, I guess. You know.
Okay, fair enough. All right.
So, in a vacuum, I don't necessarily think there's anything wrong with that, because when you talk about who your oppressor group is, that could potentially be a very narrow range of people directly responsible. For example, if a group of people who were oppressed have freed themselves from, say, slave masters or from like a dictator or something, like, yeah, okay, chase them out of the country, violence, yeah, whatever, fine. The issue that I took is that the group Professor Flowers was saying they would have a right to so depose would be uh, colonizers. And by colonizers, she seems to mean white people. And to give evidence to this, I would supply the many times where she's essentially explicitly said that she means white people by colonizers. So when added together, the full logic of this is Professor Flowers believes that if a group of people have historically been oppressed or colonized by white people, they then have the right, should they achieve political control, to choose to kill or to deport, which is an ethnic cleansing, white people in their country. And that is the reading that I have from what she had said. And you take issue with that interpretation and framing.
It's tricky because in the context of the initial discussion, yes, I do. Following that, she made a follow-up video in which she accepted a framing that I think is parasitic off of the initial conversation and lost her own plot. So I'm not defending Professor Flowers here specifically. I'm defending the account given again in the original videos, which I had some verification on once I had her on stream to talk to me.
So we're so
You
we're exclusively using evidence which I had to make my assertions in in that conversation and nothing provided afterwards. This is about the legitimacy of my extrapolations, not
Yes.
necessarily about what she actually believes.
I look, we're talking about someone I don't know Professor Flowers personally. I'm sure she's a perfectly nice person privately. I've had conversations with her. I don't think she's a bigot. I don't think she's a genocide denier. Nonetheless, um, we're looking at someone as well who has chosen to interact with profoundly bad faith actors in addition who have offered their support. So I just don't know. The point is, my ambition here is not to defend the integrity or honor of Professor Flowers. She's a big girl. She can do that herself if she so chooses. My issue is specifically with that initial contention because I think a lot gets thrown under the bus. I think there's a couple of big problems that slip under the radar as a result of that misunderstanding. That's what I'm primarily concerned with. And I understand why you had the misreading that you did. It's extremely common. I want to try and shed some light on that. You actually indicated more or less what the issue is with your first characterization of your reading. You said, and you can correct me if I'm misquoting you, um, if an oppressed group has been liberated or has like ascended to self determination, Professor Flowers contends, you say, then they have the right to do what they will with their oppressors, however we construe that, whatever we construe that to mean. Um, that sounds bad if you're not familiar with the literature that informs a lot of anti-colonial discourse around self-determination and sovereignty, et cetera, which I know you are at least to a minimal degree. But that specific phrasing of they should have the right to choose is very interesting. Note she did not say they should have the right simply to do what they will with their oppressors. She says they should have the right to decide. And the catch is, if they are self determining, that is synonymous with the statement they have the right to decide. That's what self determination means. And it was very important to me that in that conversation, when pressed, she did condemn genocidal action. Now, I think what was very obfuscating about that conversation, and I lay this at her feet because she was not careful about this, is that she tried to characterize certain kinds of activities that are in the ballpark of ethnic cleansing, at least according, well, I mean, they are ethnic cleansing. They're just not, like, we have to be careful with this language because we tend to associate that specifically with not, we can imagine in the abstract, even if practically it's impossible, removing people, quote unquote, benignly, whatever that means, from one place, i.e., as alive and capable of, continuing their lives elsewhere. But the tendency is to immediately jump to uh, ethnic control by a state, ergo Auschwitz. And that's always an open possibility, which is why again, like this topic is so incredibly dangerous. Um, when push came to shove, she morally condemned that. I isolated the sections in my response video to that whole issue, I believe, that show her doing so. It seemed to me that the argument she was making was in favor of a normative attitude permissing oppressed peoples in the abstract to have sovereignty or self-determination over a territory somewhere, to the end that when people avow that stance, we don't treat them inherently as Nazis. I don't think she even argued to the effect that we should have like a positive outlook on those things. Although again, and this is on her, she tried to give examples of practical cases where this could be benign, and I think that was a big mistake. Um, I did not take her to be advocating those things uh, initially. And this is where it gets a little bit tricky because, again, the evidence that you will pull against her character later on. And I'm not so confident in your reading as you are on that, but I understand the reading where she equivocates between whiteness and colonizers. That looks very much like a targeting of a specific subpopulation in a territory for specific negative treatment. That's where it gets a little bit dangerous. I think there's a read on that. I think there's a disjointedness in her use of these terms where there is a benign read on a similar sentence um, that might be like kind of getting fudged in with everything else. But like, I get why that causes your eyebrows to raise because they do for me as well. Um, that was meandering. I don't know if that was clear or coherent at all. Let me know if that made sense.
I understand what you're saying, though I do disagree, of course.
Uh, well, please explain if you could.
Yeah, so a couple of points. The issue I have is that oftentimes people who have really bad ideas or who have ethical foundations that would lead to really bad outcomes but don't fully understand that is that what they explicitly condemn or allow for is basically meaningless to me. So explicitly, when if you take for example a Republican and say like explicitly, do you want like black people to die to the police? A lot of them will say no, but then they'll go on to justify laws and politicians and political positions which lead to the death of a lot of innocent black people at the hands of police. Sometimes they do this knowingly, and it's like a deliberate way of abstracting the ways in which their preferred political outcomes take place. And sometimes they just don't know, and they don't realize the relationship between the things that they claim to believe and the things that they actually do believe. So what people explicitly say they care or don't care about, want or don't want, that I don't really care about. In terms of where their logic leads, I do. So in her case, I don't think she believes she supports ethnic cleansing. I don't think it's some deliberate dog whistle thing. But unfortunately, I know a lot of people on the far right who are like that on similar positions. Not full on Nick Fuentes dog whistling tier, but more like they just think it's kind of more like Tucker Carlson tier. Maybe not everyone who agrees with Tucker Carlson segments is a white nationalist. They just have concerns about America's changing demographics. Maybe if you talk to them directly, they'd be like, yeah, America can have people of any race in it, but well, we all have our biases, and a lot of people are kind of politically incoherent, which I think she is as well. So with regards to the explicit stuff, I don't care. In terms of the self-determination argument, I just don't think that parses, because I was pretty clear that I was talking morally, and in the context of the language I was using, no leftist would ever bite that bullet for anything else. Like if I asked somebody, do you think that a country should have the right to kill all of its gay inhabitants? Well, if you're talking about legal autonomy, then well, I guess any autonomous nation that's not being directly ruled over by another country would have that ability, but no leftist would ever say, yeah, I do think they should have that right. Just reflexively, they would say no. So this is an issue where charitability is kind of the name of the game, because if you want to be very charitable, you could assign a literalist autonomy driven reading, but it's not a reading supported by any of the language she used in that conversation, because I was never challenging the autonomy of these countries, and you would have to engage in a pretty big logical leap in order to like infer that I was, or that I'm suggesting the implementation of some autonomy removing device, like as though my proposition is one in which I'm saying that South Africa, if it were to get rid of all of its white people, instead it should be, directly ruled over as a vassal state from the EU or some shit like that, right? You would have to make a lot of charitable assumptions to derive that conclusion, but the one that I infer from what she was saying, the moral one, was one supported by the language she was using broadly. The whole conversation was about ethics, what it's right to do, what people should be able to do, not in terms of what they can literally achieve, but what they should have the moral freedom, the moral permission to decide. And insofar as we take that, a fairly, or I would say an unnecessarily charitable reading might arrive at the idea that this was just like a literalist autonomy driven thing, but I didn't get that from her. And to be fair, even though we're talking only about what was present in that debate, her subsequent language has further compounded to support my interpretation. This doesn't seem to be an autonomy thing. We're talking about ethics here and the right to engage in ethnic cleansing in a moral sense. I've talked to a lot of far right people who signaled their bad political positions way less evidently than her, and nobody ever called me out in it. So, that at the end of the day, like I don't know the contents of her mind, but in order for me to interpret what she was saying there charitably in a way that wasn't an affirmation of ethnic cleansing, I would have to be more charitable with her than I ever am for anyone else. I would have to be especially and specifically charitable.
All right, so you justified hypothesizing as to the nefariousness of her, either her inner motives, or to be more humble about it, the end results of the logic of her argumentation.
That's the one that I think
Um,
is more likely. Yeah, the end results of her logic, more
Now
more so
here's
than anything.
yeah. So let me ask you this: you're a moral anti-realist. The
Mhm.
question concerns ethics. What is the ceiling? What actually determines, you know, what is ethical and what is not on this in this argument?
My
I'm just
axioms.
curious. Your axioms.
Yeah. Well,
Where do those come from?
well, they come from my my biases, my preconceptions.
Oh, sure, but like let's speak very like broadly to the extent that you can describe their origin point. I'm not going to say they're like invalid or not. I am also a moral anti-realist myself. I just want to know roughly what is your conception where they come from.
I think that I have innate biases, which are a product of my psyche and of biological predispositions I have towards certain stimuli, which lead me to feel as though those things or things associated with those things should be maximized. And as a method of doing that, and by determining metrics by which I can do that, I adopt axiomatic beliefs, which I then use a normative ethical framework to apply to real world situations.
Okay, so what I was actually fishing for, that didn't work, was
Sorry.
no, it's all good. When we're talking about should they have the right in a normative sense, what is it specifically that we are targeting there? Who are we talking to? What is the upshot of that? The right to decide is the definition of self-determination. Whether it's over a territory is kind of trivial. It's always going to be over a territory. Otherwise, you're deciding over nothing. So when she says, if someone were to say more benignly, like if I were to say, I think oppressed peoples should be treated as in like suspending judgment as to what they do after the fact or what they do during. We can have like smaller, more fine-grained judgments about those. But if I say they should be able to determine their own destiny within a space of their own, in the abstract, it could be on the moon for God's sake. You probably wouldn't have much objection, or if you do, I'm curious as to what it would be.
No, I would, but I would take issue with the idea that anybody uses this language in this way in a conversation that's about morals. For example, if I say like, does this person have a right to kill like a black child? Everyone would say no. Like that would be the universal answer. But in the abstract, the right to could refer to the autonomy which allows them to make that decision. The alternative to which would be either an incredibly severe and austere police state with plenty of surveillance, or a society that has enforces some kind of mind control, where people don't even have the autonomy to do evil things because they're physically kept from doing so. But if I ever said like, do you think someone should have the right to kill a black child? Nobody would ever go, yes, because the alternative would be a society in which you had mind control. You know, like nobody would ever leap to that. The autonomy argument is only one people leap to if it's being framed as a question of autonomy, you know, such as, do you think it is better for people to have the ability to do evil? In which case, we're clearly talking about potential autonomy and the consequences of retracting it. Or in the case of South Africa and the potential ethnic cleansing of racial minorities, which in a numerical sense white people are, not in a political sense, you know, you could say something to the effect of, well, do you believe that South Africa, even after apartheid, they should have the full rights and abilities of a sovereign government, even if that means they have the potential to do bad things? Which is a statement that I would agree with, because the alternative would be some kind of like, you know, yeah, some weird, you know, like subservient vassal state type business. But I just don't think that was the conversation that we were having, and her
Okay,
language didn't give me that
see,
impression.
I think that actually was the conversation you were having, albeit she was doing so incredibly badly, and I think there were a few things kind of bleeding into there from other circles in which she engages. At this juncture, I mean, like we could go into that other thing. I had some mild disagreements about your assertion that we don't talk about rights in this way. I think we practically only talk about rights in this way. We only talk about rights when when somebody tries to apply something other than your own, you know, like your own, an appeal to your own preference to do something or to not do something. You can't have an abortion. That's immoral. But I have a right. And what does that mean, for better or for worse? It means that you have a right secured by the state to do this. At the level of the state, it doesn't come from anywhere except the absence of any external impediment, because that's what sovereignty means. So what I took her to be saying, and again,
Can I
like,
say one thing though?
yeah, by all means.
The difference, though, is that semantically, right to an abortion is literally the language we use to defend the laws over whether or not we have the ability to get an abortion,
Yeah.
whereas the right to commit ethnic cleansing doesn't evoke an immediate semantic relationship to any existing legal or international framework which would prevent it. When people talk about the right to do ethnic cleansing, they're not doing so in the context of or in reference to this vassalage that would be necessary to prevent it from. Mind you, by the way, I suppose I would be okay with some kind of international body that did make it so we didn't even have the right to do an ethnic cleansing. We have international law to that effect, I suppose, and technically ethnic cleansing would be in violation of international law. So depending on how you want to parse it, technically nobody has the right. It just happens anyway. But outside of that, I guess, technicality, the right to an abortion thing I think is unique because that is it refers to a discourse we have about law. Not so with ethnic cleansing.
Well, specifically, it concerned whether or not they have the right to decide X, and there could have been ethnic cleansing, but it could have been anything else. But a self-determining body, and by the way, I am not pro this conception of the state. I think there are a lot of problems with it, but we're all sort of drinking the same Kool-Aid here. Insofar as we are talking about self-determination as equivalent to some kind of territorial sovereignty in like the colloquial sense of what a state is, that's what it comes with. It's just it's the game you're playing there.
But
Now,
nobody would ever say that. If I ever said, "Well, don't you think a country should have the right to kill like all of its trans people?" No one would ever. No one on the left would ever answer yes.
well, I
Like
think if memory
ever.
serves, and I could be incorrect about this, I believe that's actually a hypothetical fronted by you. Now, it's a real hypothetical. That is an important question to bring up in this. That would actually stand as a very good argument for, again, like what you were describing earlier with some super state or whatever, eliminating basically politics as we understand it. So you don't have sovereign bodies making these decisions. Um, that's where that kind of argumentation leads you. But insofar as we are assuming the existence of, uh, we are assuming as kind of a methodological baseline that self-determination means being able to exercise the exact same rights over a community that a state exercises over its population. I mean, this is one of the this is one of the reasons why the modern state is a bad thing. It has an inherently genocidal logic to it.
No, I completely agree with that. Don't get me
Yeah.
wrong. It's just, again, I can never disprove this argument because a hyper charitable interpretation of almost any statement can lead you to a fair reading. I just feel like the default logic associated with the language, do you believe morally they should be able to do X? And whether X is like kill a minority group or like genocide so and so, people will by default answer no. And I don't think that with respect to with whatever respect is due to Professor Flowers, I don't think she's, exceptionally bright. I don't think we're talking like brain god status here. I don't think she was 18 steps ahead of me. I just think that she wasn't.
In her defense, I think she's very young. I
Well,
was
I
I
actually have
was
no
not
idea how old
good
she
at
is.
this. I don't either. I'm just speculating.
I
But
however old she might be, I genuinely have no idea. I don't even know if she's a professor. I don't know. It's just the issue I take, I guess, is that I don't think the position I think she has is that uncommon, really. Um, a lot of people have really bad preconceptions that can be extrapolated into really damaging political systems that just kind of go unexamined. This is just a novel one for intra-left discourse because usually it's not a matter of, whether or not like the minority can genocide the whites. There's always a triviality associated, right? Like, we
certainly,
take anti everyone else racism very seriously because it has actual social repercussions, but anti-white racism as a concept here in the States, in the left, is not treated with much seriousness. To be fair, it's not as serious, so that makes sense. But that doesn't mean it's not bad when it actually does happen, and it happens a lot. There are a lot of black families that are kind of against their kids marrying into like like a white they don't want to like have interracial kids, or they're they have kind of latent essentialist anti-white beliefs. I feel like it's not that uncommon, and I don't think anyone would ever search for this much charitability if a white person had engaged in the reciprocal of this logic. I feel like, is there not a discomfort, right? Like the idea that Professor Flowers might.
if you're not discomfortable by this topic at all, I think there's something wrong with your head. But I put the ball back into your court. Suppose, for argument's sake, using that specific language, we give Professor Flowers the power to carve out a circular area of somewhere in the United States wherein uh, Black people and only Black people have a right of citizenship, and over which, whatever government structure they put into place, it has the full decision-making power to do whatever it will with any population in its territory.
Mhm.
And then you, righteous anti-genocide activist that you are, and I commend you for this, come in with the guard and you force them all out. You disband this weird little circular state. It gets absolved, and everything was exactly as it was before. Is it still the case, or is it not still the case, that some ethnically biased body nonetheless retains the decision-making power, i.e. the right, in political science parlance, to do what it will with any subgroup in its population? Is that not the case still?
Well, it depends on what level and what degree of abstraction we're talking about. I mean, even in
Literally, like literally, there is a body of people who can make the decision at any given moment, above which there is no higher authority to do this. Now we can characterize body at any
if
level of
somebody
abstraction.
asked me if they had the moral right to do something I considered immoral, my answer would be no. Because I wouldn't assume they were saying, do they have the moral right to act in accordance with their supreme jurisdiction over that region?
I'm not asking. I'm not asking if they would have the moral right. We're moral anti-realists. Remember, we
Well,
have nothing
that's
to refer to here except for our impulses.
Well, hold on. Moral anti-realism doesn't mean that I don't have a consistent normative ethical position. I was saying moral right with Professor Flowers.
Hang on. You're correct. However, it does mean that my eliminating you from existence stands as a sufficient moral rebuttal, because that's the only thing that makes that thing real, right?
Well, I would say that those perceptions of what's morally good or bad would persist after my death. Simply that my interpretation would be the correct one. That you can't empirically determine what is or is not morally right, but as far as I and my action and my analysis are concerned, I can only ever act with my subjective perception um, of the axiomatic beliefs that I hold.
Fair enough, but again, we're still talking fundamentally about behavioral attitudes that you hold, right, or something along those lines. I'm not in that earlier.
Well, I'm
area
only
of
talking
philosophy,
about my way of making my axiomatic values
sure.
happen.
Okay, let me rephrase the question then. Do you think that denying that group in particular from having the right in these terms, and we can change the word right to decision. I think they actually mean the same thing ultimately. When we're talking about a right, we are ultimately talking to what is in the purview of an agent to do.
Well, you're presupposing that because I said explicitly moral right with Professor Flowers like 40 times. At no point did I infer or suggest that I was referring to the autonomy or decision-making body of South Africa.
In the latter part of your conversation, she actually did specifically say, in response, I can't remember if she said morally or not, but she said you can't do some things like that, like genocide.
Well, I think in that case, she was further supporting my argument because rather than denounce it morally, she was simply saying that legally or, geopolitically, it wouldn't be possible.
I took her to mean morally. I mean, legally or geopolitically, she was entirely in the right. That's one of the problems here. That's why the logic's dangerous, because it actually obtains.
Well, if she was speaking morally, then why couldn't she have condemned it any time prior to that?
Well, there's a couple of reasons I can imagine why she'd be reticent to. Let's take the Haitian Revolution, for example. As a result of that, massacres were or one massacre, my history is not good, but a massacre was allowed to take place afterwards of the French population, or the white French population, or however it's construed. People were picked out and killed on racial grounds.
Mm-hmm.
That was allowed to happen because of the revolution itself. Now, if you ask somebody, hey, should the Haitian people be allowed or should they have the right to make decisions?
Because that was the language that I used, the moral right. Do they have a moral right to what?
Well, I mean here, the moral right to have the right to decide. That's the catch. We're talking about the right to decide still.
No, because I'm not talking about the right to decide. Everyone has the right to do anything by that logic. I'm not physically impeded from doing anything that my bones and my skin and my muscles can't allow me to do. Physically, I have the right to do any amount of mischief, mayhem, murder before the police stop me. And if I'm better and faster than the police, I can do even more. But we're not talking about that. I said moral right, and I always said it with her, too.
Okay, fair enough,
Morally,
but then there's no disagreement. I don't think anybody has contended that
but then there's no
anyone has
point
some.
because anyone can do anything. Whether or not you have the ability, should they have the right? If you mean this in the ubiquitous, do they have the autonomy to engage in any behavior? Well, then we don't even have to talk about jurisdiction. State governments can operate
Well,
without
we
the
do, because the
approval
argument
of their
was whether or
national
not should
governments.
they have the moral right. So she's talking to people who have uh, the potential or the ability to argue for people, again, like a people in a place having that level of authority over themselves construed on
If they
certain
believe this,
lines.
then people would be able to answer, do you think that a government should have the moral right to murder all of its LGBT citizens? I asked Noah Sampson and he didn't answer, and I believe I asked Professor Flowers and she didn't answer either. So it seems like if they were consistent in this practice, they're genuinely referring to autonomy, that their
I don't
default
think you
answer
would
would be,
ask. I don't think you would ask should in the case of should they have the right in the case of a moral question. You would simply say ask do they have the right.
no, I
And of
said
course,
I said should
yeah.
they and do they have the right both to Professor Flowers. Keep in mind the only reason that I used language like that rather than just should they is because I didn't think Professor Flowers was smart enough to understand the
Well, no,
extrapolated
but like,
outcomes of her position.
yeah, but I mean, you see the absurdity of even asking the question, should they have the right in a strictly moral sense? You're now asking, should, according to what measure they have
No, it's like
a
should they
moral permission to, like, it doesn't make up any
No, no,
sense, does
no,
it?
it does
Like, it seems
because
redundant.
morally you can think that something is potentially bad, but you can still believe a person should have the moral right to do it. So, for example, I think that smoking is bad. It just seems to hurt people. I don't like it that much. But morally, I think people should have the right to choose to smoke. So, if a person asks me, do you think somebody should smoke? I would say no. But then if they asked me, do you think somebody should have the right to smoke? I would say yes. In that case, the right to allows for a distinction where I think there's an allowance where a person can do something because even though I don't like it or think it's good, I think it's an acceptable thing for someone to do. Now, I don't think Professor Flowers thinks that killing all the whites in South Africa is good, but I do think she thinks it's something acceptable to do. As in, it isn't something she would advocate for explicitly, but it's something in the realm of, oh, well, it's up to them. And not in a autonomous sense, because in that case, anything and everything is up to everyone before the police stop them, but in a moral sense, where even if she doesn't agree, that the moral right for them to decide supersedes the disagreement she might have with the outcome that they bring about. She wouldn't condemn the process by which they arrived at that. But I would wholeheartedly condemn the process by which the Holocaust took place, even though the
Sure.
Holocaust is a natural extension of the national autonomy of Germany.
I don't think that last part's a necessary conclusion, though. You could sustain that morally we have like some kind of impetus to allow people to have the decision to have that kind of power, and then in the event they misuse that power in certain ways we can tolerate, we then justify it to, or we are then fully justified in intervening violently. I don't see a contradiction
But they
there.
can
I
still
don't think
do
she
it.
would.
Intervening violently doesn't mean they can't do it. You could argue that if we're talking autonomy, the only
Well,
way you could
it's
actually interfere with
yeah.
someone's autonomy is with brain control chips, right? Just because it's illegal for them to do something or they're going to be stopped or invaded doesn't mean that they don't have the autonomy to do it. This is why I think the autonomy argument is reductive. Because if you want to interpret it at its face, should they have the ability to do something? Everyone has the ability to do anything, and any state can do whatever they want. Invasion is just a deterrent, and so is arrest. Murder is just a deterrent, right? At the end of the day, you can do anything outside of direct mind control. So
Well, no, I think murder is specifically legally or morally qualified killing. It's
being
kind
being
of baked into
killed,
the
being killed by
definition,
the
right?
cops, right? But no one's
Sure.
talking about mind control or brain chips. So outside of that, it seems pretty clear that we're talking about like what is permissible in a moral sense.
Sure, but that's always going to be within the logic of an existing sovereign power already. We're talking about like existing norms of whatnot that are held in place again by fixed cultures with their own histories, yada, yada, yada. At the level of states, we can't really talk like that because there's literally nothing above states to cement those things in place. We're ultimately talking about what we will permit from our vantage. And I'm on board with you there. But I think that conjecturing that Professor Flowers finds mass killing of any kind acceptable, that's a conjecture. I don't think it's supported by what you said. I can see the danger in what you said leading to that kind of thing. I think it's a jump to say that that's actually what she's advocating for, or that's what she holds. I think you're making a bit of a leap there.
I don't think it's
Um,
really a leap. It's language she couldn't condemn. It's like no, again, since the autonomy argument is only really stopped by mind
yeah,
control, um In no other circumstance, hey, like, do you think people should have the moral right to kill and rape their neighbor? Well, no one would say yes there, but it's like, well, you think they should be mind controlled to keep that? Well, no, people are talking like ethically, like what do they? You can think a thing that a person does is bad, but still think like it's up to them. You know, that's just the logic I think she's engaging in
You
here. I
you
think
can,
personally she's
yeah.
uncomfortable with the idea of a white person, that would be me here, telling oppressed people what they can and can't do. I also think that she's racist against white people. Like, she just doesn't like white people very much. I don't think that's exceptional. Like, a lot of people are racist. Like, a lot of people think it's this big condemnation or like, some exceptional personal flaw. But if anything, being on the left has taught me that probably on Earth, the number of people who are explicitly racially biased probably exceeds the number of people who are not. So, yeah, I don't know. It's just
Well,
not
I
that
mean,
uncommon.
well, hang on. Like the decision doesn't disappear though to do those things just because it is held by a white person as opposed to a new person, whether that's a black person or otherwise. That decision is still there. Someone still has the right to make that decision. She's only saying that that decision should extend to other groups.
But
Now,
nobody talks about it that way.
I
And
think
and
she
by the way,
was.
they can
I'm
do that
saying she
right now.
was.
Black Africans in South Africa right now can kill the white people there if they want to. They're not being mind controlled. Right now they have the right. They control the government. The government of South Africa is controlled, as if I am correct, by a black man at the moment. If they wanted to, they could absolutely. They have the ability. That already exists.
Yeah, yeah, it does. It's
Yeah.
not a prescription, it's just a description.
Yeah, but
Now she's
no
saying,
one talks like that. No, again, like I can't help but wonder what bias is leading you to this level of charitability, because in all my time doing this, in all my conversations, nobody has ever responded to the question, morally, do you think they should be able to do this, with an answer which indicated they were referring explicitly to autonomy. I've never seen that happen, not once. No one would ever answer that way when we're
look,
talking about crimes.
as soon as you interject "to be able," that's an invocation of autonomy right there. You're not saying morally can they do this. You're saying morally can they do this? Should they be able to do this?
No, morally,
You see
should
the
they be
problem?
permitted? Should it be a thing which, even if you
No, no,
disagree
that's
with, they
that's
should
that's that's something else because permission is something you can suspend. Yes, you can be an outside party, allowing someone to do what they want until it reaches a certain peak, and then you eliminate their sovereignty once you cannot tolerate it.
But
That's
the
a
only way to eliminate that sovereignty would be with brain control. The problem with your framing of this question is that the only other answer you could take, the only
hang on, wait, just
anti-autonomy position, would be one in which you use magic to control people. Because you can do, well, should people have the right to, i.e. the autonomy to X? As long as your body's capable of doing it, you can do it. And hell, maybe you don't even need your body. Maybe you can pay other people to do it. Like anything, everything. At that point, the question of, do you think morally you should be able to do X, isn't even a meaningful question. Say the right to an abortion, right? Do you think a person should morally be able to have an abortion? You can have an abortion even if it's illegal. Even
yeah.
then, the law is only a proxy for the real question, which is the ethics of an abortion. Whether or not you should be able to have an abortion morally is what's on the table. The law is just expected to follow the morals. But we're talking about the morals there, because
Yeah, of
law can't
course.
prevent you from
But hang
having an
on.
abortion.
Yeah, but slow down, cowboy. The ethics and the morals, these are going to surround things that are suspended in existence by political force. We only have the institutions and whatnot that command some kind of moral deference because of that force. And at that level, you're ultimately talking about who gets to decide what is normal and when does the normal end. That's why sovereignty always ends up being a decision of who has, well, a question of who has the decision. Because it is reductive, but that's what it reduces to. And this is one of the problems with that attitude towards the state is that, again, like it two dimensionalizes how we talk about human relations. That's one of the reasons why I'm opposed to it. The danger here, again, is that the framing of that argument obfuscates the way in which, by your specific counters to Professor Flowers in that conversation, you were defending the same powers that she was talking about should be extended, or at the very least should be treated as being uh, it should be treated as something that we're not inherently opposed to extending to non-white people. You are defending the holding of that by just whoever happens to have it thus far. And it's established by the same means. Now, I'm against both. I think you are too. But I think the problem is the confused way in which that conversation went. You ended up taking a conservative stance with respect to the sovereignty, i.e., the decision-making power to commit genocide, ethnocide, etc.
Nobody was
of
talking about
incumbents.
autonomy.
I think the whole thing was even the
No, no.
initial.
Again, you've already
I
ceded the
reviewed.
point that
No,
the only
no, hang
way
on.
you can meaningfully restrict autonomy here is through mind control.
Well, I mean, I don't know why you're
Like what?
specifying mind
Like what?
control. Any
So,
kind of
but like what?
control.
So wait. In this entire 2.5 hour convo, we were talking about autonomy the whole time, even though all I
Yes.
said was morally, and I never proposed any framework by which the autonomy of South Africa could be ceded. It's an autonomous country already.
No, because you inserted a principle of autonomy into the moral characterization. You're mixing the two up. That's the issue.
I
But
never challenged their
you describe
autonomy.
both as being separate.
They are separate. If we're talking about autonomy, anyone can do
Oh,
anything that they want. It's just varying degrees of political, legal disincentives that keep them from doing so.
yes.
Right, but you can still do whatever you want. And again, and you keep not responding to this, nobody would ever answer yes if you said, morally, do you think you should have the right to kill and rape people? Or morally, do you think Nazi Germany had the right to commit the Holocaust? By your logic, people would go, oh yeah, we're not talking about whether or not this could be a question of autonomy, which at this point would be like semantic bullshit that would achieve nothing. Because if we're talking about autonomy in this respect, then there's no meaningful answer other than yes, because that's the only thing anything can be for a sovereign state. We're talking,
Because
wait, but no one would say
sure.
this ever. If take any lefty and just walk up to them, especially Professor Flowers. Talk to Professor Flowers. Morally, do you think that like the Nazis had the
I
right
did,
to?
as a matter of fact. I did, as a matter of fact. I actually got a concrete answer. I was very careful
Did
to
you ask
encompass that.
her morally? Do you think the Nazis had a right to be able to do the Holocaust? And she said yes.
I asked her morally, would a group with that decision-making power be in the right to do so ever by dint of having that power? An equivalent question to that. She said no. You
Well
see,
then,
here's the issue. Again, when you're saying morally should they have the right, there's a bridge there. You're not saying morally can they do this morally. You're saying should our attitude towards them having the right be morally negative or positive? And that was the conversation. In fact, that was even the content of the video she made that conversation was responding to. I reviewed that extensively just before this conversation.
I will. You will never be able to move me on the idea that this is anything other than like semantic pedantry. The idea that this was about. I don't
No, no,
know
no.
if this is.
Specification.
I don't know if
We're
this is like
talking, we're
poly
talking about the
sidebrain or
implications of
whatever.
words. We're talking about the implications of the language. It's
Okay,
always going to be semantic, but that matters.
the implications of and you can 99 out of 100, 100 out of 100. Hey, do you think somebody should have the moral right to kill, the moral right to rape innocent people? No one will say yes. President, like professor, this wasn't.
Nonetheless, if
We
you
weren't,
ask
but
them if they should have sovereignty, which is asking the same thing,
I did
many
not.
will
I
say
did not
yes.
ever ask that. Sovereignty is presumed. These are nation states.
Every time you ask, should they have the right to be able to? That is what you are asking.
No, I'm not. I
Yes.
genuinely don't understand why. Okay, I encourage you to talk to people, and you can ask
I
the
do.
questions that I've
This
asked.
is what I do. I talk about this endlessly.
No, nobody will ever interpret this question as a question as to whether or not that it is good for them to have the sovereignty which will allow them to do that thing. No
You're
one will
incorrect.
ever. No, they don't, because if they did, everyone would say yes to this.
Well, no, not if they're reacting to the specific egregious terms that you use to specify the bad things that can arise from that sovereignty. They're reacting to the language, not to the fact of it. That's why, again, nobody will reject
Well,
the notion
then if
that
that was the case,
should be able to have sovereignty.
if that was the case, then Professor Flowers should have said no. If they're reacting not to the semantic language, and by the way, you're acting as though your semantic interpretation is the only correct one. It's not, though. But if we're to say the average person would react only to the severity of the language, Professor Flowers should have said no. The fact that she couldn't say no, the fact that after being asked over and over, she remained adamant on that, in spite of being, and I want to be clear here, she would absolutely say no in response to whether the Nazis had a right to be able to do the Holocaust. Indicates that she was willing to not say no in spite of how severe the language was. I don't think she's uncomfortable with the concept. And and by the way, her language already speaks for itself. I'm only asking the follow-up question here. She already said that she feels as though oppressed people should have the right to decide whether or not they want to live with their oppressors. And live with, I'm really sorry, can only mean two things here when we're talking about statecraft. if we're talking about individuals, then fine, move to whatever neighborhood you want. But if we're talking about statecraft here, live with your oppressors, groups constituting millions of people, it's murder or forced deportation. Those are pretty much the two directions there. She already, in no uncertain terms, indicated a comfort with ethnic cleansing. I was only trying to get her to condemn it.
Hang on. Can we get a specific citation on that? I'd be curious to see. Look, if that's true, this isn't even related to the point. If we're just talking about Professor Flower's attitude to this, I'd be interested to see that.
She said that in the video that I responded to.
I have not followed this religiously because, again, I'm specifically concerned with the original video and with the original conversation. But if you have that to hand, that would be extraordinarily useful.
I think it was the second video that she made, or maybe the first one. It was
that. The second video she responded to, like, I would agree, because again, I think she took away your interpretation as something she had to defend the negative of. She immediately goes, and this is a horrendous failure of imagination. There is nothing a colonized people can do that would match what the oppressor powers or colonial powers or whatever have done. And
which
of
is
course,
very much a threat in couched language.
I don't think necessarily, but I think the issue was she felt she had to defend a genocidal logic, which she didn't originally come to the table with, at least not developed in that way. What it does is it does two dangerous things. The minor point is that obviously, the minor point is that obviously it represents a failure of imagination. Just take however you quantify the amount of violence done by colonizing powers and then plus one. The other thing is that, again, it entrenches the debate as being specifically around whether or not we should be okay with the results, with the worst possible results of sovereign power being extended.
Yeah, because
from that point on, she loses me.
Well,
from that point on, she loses me. But I would like to. I think that's a stretch insofar as we're talking a racism that's peculiar to her. I would
Don't you think it's a bit telling that when a person's being accused of being okay with ethnic cleansing of whites, her response isn't, I think that would be wrong, actually. Her response is, there is nothing we could do to you which would be worse than what you've done to us. Like,
the response to that is in the original conversation with you. I isolated that.
Right. Isn't that very indicative? I mean, it's very clear what the messaging here is. Again, would you engage in
that response, though? She gave you that response. I'm not defending her character. I think she's flubbed this horribly. But she gave you that response. It's in the recording. That's an objective fact. She told you. She addressed people who find themselves in a situation of having suddenly self-determining power over a place. Hey, there are things you can't do. And she's not talking about ability anymore. She is talking normatively. Killing people is bad, etc., etc. She says this in your initial conversation near the end. I know because I watched this goddamn thing like 3 times.
Well, she's okay with killing people. She would have to be. Everyone is. The Haitian Revolution, the American Revolution.
Oh, no, I agree. Look, it's a contradiction in her logic. We're moving away from logic now.
Because it's a hasty runaway. To
say that she's comfortable with it, that's not true.
But it's a hasty runaway.
What you said.
Her logical. She's inconsistent.
That's a hypothesis. I would like to see some substantiation of that.
She said that oppressed people should have the right to decide whether or not they want to live with their oppressors.
Yes, that's what sovereignty is. It would include every other thing they choose to do.
No. You can't keep doing this, okay? Because if that's the case, everyone would make videos where everything is okay because everything fits under sovereignty. Left Tube would be booting up a video and saying, hey, listen, I think that white people should be able to do genocide and you should be able to kill people who are ethnic minorities and also gay people. And then they would close the video. Nobody is talking about sovereignty. The fact that you keep insisting that they are is actually beyond me. Nobody is talking about it.
She explicitly says self-determination in both her video and her conversation with you.
What other group talk about self-determination in the context of ethnicity? What only other group? Liberals don't do this, by the way. Liberals don't.
Well, hang on, slow down, cowboy. We call it the nation state.
Who uses that language?
Everyone. We're talking about nationality. That's a level of ethnicity. It's not racial.
Self-determination for a given ethnic group. This is running towards bad faith. Ethno-nationalists.
No, I resent that. That's not. I've actually been extraordinarily careful here. And
It's
again,
you're well,
you can review all of the material.
I don't think you're not being careful. I think that you're engaging in a delusional level of charitability here. Ethno
I'm not being
nationalists,
charitable. No, no, no. Hang on. I am
ethno
in the dark.
nationalists
Hang on.
talk about it.
I am in the dark about whether or not Professor Flowers is actually in her heart of hearts a bigot. I can absolutely concede that she has given you all the fodder you need to make the conjecture. It remains a conjecture, but fair enough.
It's
I
always
am
inference
specifically
what a
talking
person
about
believes. If a person says they're a
yes,
Nazi, they could be lying. We're still inferring.
I do not care what she believes. The problem is that the way in which the language was treated in that debate and following it obscures the very real point that actually we are all very, very much playing exactly the same kind of skeezy, dirty game that you're describing her as playing.
I am not
That
playing
is a
any
necessary.
game. Her language has been straightforwardly conservative or far right in accordance with the many conversations I've had with people of that political ideology. If I were to engage in the level of charitability that you're engaging in right now, I would never be able to make any inferential statements about anyone ever. There would be no utility to it. Anytime I saw anything, like when Tucker Carlson talks about how changing demographics are leading to
Yes.
Democrats taking over America, I could go, well, by demographics, he could be referring to voting demographics. That's a legitimate thing that he could be saying. There's no
Sure.
inherent racial tone to it. Like past a point, inferences have to be justified. They can't really be proven necessarily, but like the degree you're engaging in here requires me to believe that whenever people talk about the moral right to do something, they're actually talking about autonomy, which is a practical consideration, and the moral right to have that autonomy, which is a
No, no, no,
worthless
no, no.
convo.
That's my accusation of you. I'm saying that whenever somebody talks about autonomy, you infer that there's a morality attached to that.
I was
I'm
asking
defining that.
morally. I was saying morally X and Y.
Uh, did you explicitly say that, or did
Yeah.
you respond to her making an argument about self-determination?
No, I
Because if she
asked
was saying, should they be able to, or should they have the right to, we are talking about a normative attitude towards sovereignty. We are not talking about a moral attitude towards what that sovereignty does.
there's no alternative to sovereignty. There's no country in the world that doesn't have the sovereignty to do genocides within their borders. But yes, I said over and
Okay,
over,
so hang on.
morally,
Wait, by an extension of that logic, if indeed a group of people who are all black or whatever, again, choose only to include black people as members of a citizenry, if they establish a state anywhere in that world, they have a that's what they have established is the right to do that over within their territory. That's what sovereignty means.
but we're talking about moral right.
Well, no, we're bouncing back and forth.
I have never talked about sovereignty at any point, and neither, frankly, was she. We were
She
talking
was
about ethics.
exclusively talking about sovereignty, exclusively, except when pressed, she agreed with you. Again, I'm telling you over and over again, it's in the video that still exists. We
What
can
language
see this.
what language did she use to indicate that the
English.
entire Okay, take a moment. I said morally, probably 100 times in that conversation. I was incredibly
Look,
clear
look, I'm
that
not
I
a
was
math guy,
talking
but be
about.
careful with numbers here. You did not say that 100 times. I'm not even certain you said it more than twice, if even once. I'd have to review it. Maybe you did, but I've watched that probably way more than anybody else alive. I did not see that there. Again, I'm not imputing bad faith to you. I'm saying you misread. I would invite you to review it. I think your misreading is fair. I think she engaged in some of the most optically horrendous behavior following that imaginable. It has been a goddamn nightmare dealing with the after effects of
You
this.
know what? Here, hold
Like,
on. Hold on.
sure.
We're just gonna we're just gonna play a portion of the debate. Just a second. To me, the idea that this was a conversation about sovereignty, in spite of the fact that at no point did I ever posit any imposition on the sovereignty of South Africa, is just insane to me. And I feel like extending this logic to conversations I have with people would deny me the ability to ever at any point infer any meaning from anything they said. I would have to take everything at its explicit word, but if there were two possible interpretations, I'd have to default to the one which was more charitable, even if
Well,
less likely.
when you're deriving their logic from what they're saying, you absolutely do need to pay attention to exactly what they say.
Her logic is pretty consistent in my mind. She's okay with white people dying if it's in service of like geopolitical black ethno-nationalist interest. It's not like ethno-nationalists aren't a thing. I've talked to them. They can be white, they can be black.
No, I understand that, but if you're going to make that claim, like you need something very specific to
We do
point to.
we do. Here,
Well,
hold on.
please produce it.
You have here. Just hold on, Mark. Sorry, I thought you'd be more considerate than that. One second.
That I'm
People link
genocidal,
this.
and I just want to clear up what I mean. What I mean to say
This is
is
in the
that
follow-up video.
there
This
is
is in
no
your
amount
I
of
know.
violence that colonized people can enact.
Yeah, chat. We're not looking at this. Hold on here.
Talking
Journalists
about
ask for right there. Self-determination is the dog whistle that they use when talking about ethnostates. This is what I
They're
mean
talking about
about it.
self-determination in the context of other people being inferior inherently. They're talking about self-determination in the context of wanting to have their own state because they are looking down on other people.
Haven't you listened to
right?
Richard
people
Spencer?
who are oppressed talking. I've heard of plenty of Richard Spencer.
She's
People who
comparing
are
Nazis
oppressed.
with
inferior.
black nationalists, I think.
I am. I'm saying that her language, I'm pointing out to her that the use of ethnic self-determination is one of the most consistent dog whistles for ethno-nationalists in existence.
Fair enough, except here again, she's talking about disparate treatment to Nazis and those on the grounds that one, again, is asserting a right based on a history of oppression that has served them versus one that was done to them, right?
Irrelevant when we're talking about ethnic cleansing. If it's not being done in favor...
No, because we're not talking about ethnic cleansing. We're talking about how we, in a normal situation, are treating people who avow a nationalist ethnic stance.
Well, the only difference there is who's had the power. Like, there are groups that have had the
precisely.
power
So hang on. So when we're judging people in a situation where they don't have the power now, we are kinder to the black nationalist than we are to the Nazi.
Well, black separatist, but nah, I don't think so.
Or the black separatist, same deal. I think so. I think there's something inherently less noble about Richard Spencer wanting an ethno-state than somebody who comes from a line of people who have been oppressed by the like of Richard Spencer wanting an ethno-state.
Do you think that being oppressed means that your reciprocal desire for an ethno-state is somehow more noble or more justifiable?
No, it just means that when you judge them, you have that in the back of your mind as a qualifier. You're not as cruel in your judgment of them. You still condemn it. It's a bad thing.
I don't understand the relationship between these variables.
I think we'll have to be at peace with that for now. Let's keep on with this.
Yeah.
To have their own self-determination. And the reason why they're oppressed is because they don't have their own self-determination. And the reason why I'm using that term is because it looks so different in every country. And I think people need to have the space to talk about that and to figure it out without being called a white nationalist.
So again, I don't have a problem with talking about it. It's just a lot of
she's mistaken.
Like,
it's very much the same in almost every single country, but that's beside the point.
What's pretty much the same in every single country?
Oh, just how self-determination looks in terms of its structure. It's
not ethnic self-determination usually. That's not generally.
But the self-determination itself, that's the common thing.
Yeah, the self-determination isn't talked about.
I'm making a point here. I'm saying that she's misconstruing things a little bit here, but that's irrelevant.
I'm just saying self-determination is taken for granted in nation states. The reason why non-racists don't talk about it is because it's taken for granted. People who start talking about it are talking about it because they lack it in the context of ethnic supremacy.
Incidentally, I have an entire series where I specifically point out that the emergence of the nation state as a concept is precisely the result of ethnic filtering at the border. But I mean, whatever, we can keep on going with this.
Yeah, here.
Wait, can we please... doing it right now. You're like, you're a white nationalist.
I'm literally talking about it right now.
Richard Spencer said this and that. It's like, please. I know.
So when you're saying we have a right to discriminate against this racial group to preserve the self-determination of our people, yeah, that does sound a little white nationalisty. So you'll have to forgive me for drawing that.
It's not just to preserve the self-determination. Okay, sorry. Go on. Go ahead. Go on.
Can we pause for a second?
Sure.
I resent the insinuation of bad faith. So let me be abundantly clear here, lest I be even considered as having the capacity to benefit from being bad faith towards you. Every single person who has opposed you thus far on this issue that I have seen has been a disingenuous slimeball, and I disavow them.
I understand that. I don't think that you are like like holding water for some sort of crooked reason or whatever. It's just the idea that like the idea that when people talk about the moral right to do something, they're talking about autonomy and would necessarily lead to outcomes that aren't present. So I can only assume that people don't.
Hang on. Can I draw this out for you quickly?
Sure.
Okay, so look, moral right to...
No, stop. You're doing the semantics thing again. Go up to any person on the street. Do you have the moral right to like shoot a kid in the head?
We're distinguishing phrases. It is semantic. That's what that means.
But what you're doing right now is you're obfuscating the interpreted meaning of a phrase by breaking it down into a number of its possible interpretations and arbitrarily choosing the one that favors you.
Okay, well, right back at you. You're obfuscating the meaning of a phrase by folding two different meanings just based again on common usage. They're equivocal, but they don't mean the same thing.
I am appealing to common usage. Yes, overwhelmingly common usage.
Okay, but there are levels here. Like there's common usage in different spheres of analysis. When we're talking about the right of states, we are not talking about the right of individuals definitionally. We're not talking about moral rights.
I was never talking about statehood, only morals. I was never talking about the ability of South Africa to do things. The conversation was primed to be about morals.
I understand that, but do they have the right to commit genocide is different from asking whether they should have the right to be able to decide to commit genocide. One is asking, should we have a permissive attitude towards the existence of a decision? The other one is having a permissive attitude towards the action that decision makes.
You can talk to as many people, like colloquially, as you want, and nobody is ever going to bite on the autonomy argument. If you ask them if someone should have the right to do a thing that is immoral, they will always say no. That's the default response people have.
You're mistaken. I actually have a sense that some people in Doe's server, maybe Doe herself, she reads Deleuze and Guattari, she's familiar with Schmidt, they might actually be very on board with that language.
It is. Well, first of all, Doe is very smart.
Apologies.
Right. Doe is very smart and also very big into philosophy. And Flowers is not, and I'm going to guess not. And secondly, I feel like colloquially, if you were talking with Doe for 2 hours, where you're increasingly incredulously saying something like, wow, you really think people should have the right to kill children? Doe, not being a fucking moron, might at some point say, oh, by the way, I'm not affirming the morality of the situation. I'm only saying that I believe they should have the autonomy to do so. Because Doe, again, not being a cretin, would, if there was that semantic confusion, recognize that I wasn't attacking the concept of sovereignty because I never did at any point here, and was actually just outraged at the idea of, you know, affirming the potential for ethnic cleansing. I don't have the highest opinion of Professor Flowers' intelligence, but I feel like even someone at her level should be able to realize, like, anything could have cleared this up. Oh, by the way, what do you mean when you say that? Do you mean they should, like, I think they should be able to, or I think they should have the ability to be able to do so through autonomy? And I could go, well, there's nothing you can meaningfully do to restrict a nation state's autonomy, and that would probably have really bad outcomes. So let's say they have the ability to do so and should have the power which allows them that ability, but you would still agree then, within that framework, morally, they shouldn't have the moral right to do it. And we could have solved it right there. But I don't think she was thinking autonomy.
Again, the video that conversation was precipitated by was specifically concerned with autonomy. And when you actually watch the stream full that you had in which you had a conversation with her, all the content you just described is there, portrayed terribly, but the content is there. And I confirmed with this after the fact that was her meaning. I don't know what else you want at that juncture. I mean, interpret it as you will, that content is there. I have not seen anything to the effect that your interpretation of the conversation is correct. I would just invite you to review it. Like I fully believe that this is your honest take on that conversation. I just think you're mistaken.
Why did she say, like, you can just ask, like, do you think Nazi Germany had the right to do the Holocaust? Do you really think you're going to get a yes? No. You used it. No, wait, the question that you asked got a no from her. I want you to ask the exact same question that I asked, because she's also going to say no.
Yeah, of course, because we have the history of what Nazi Germany did.
Then
but
why wouldn't she
do that? If we simply asked in the abstract, should German people be allowed to have autonomy over a region?
Nobody said autonomy. I never said autonomy. I never said autonomy.
Self-determination is what the ability refers to.
No, this is my point. This ethnic cleansing of 6 million white South Africans is also bad, but apparently the considerations of that moral wrong weren't enough to make her default towards a moralistic response on the position. Here, wait, people are saying 1029. All right, thank you, chat. 1029.
All right, let's see this.
And there's like a lot of violence that happened there. I think like dealing with colonialism is going to be messy, and there needs to be room to have nuance in these conversations. And I think just kind of reducing it to like, oh, this is white nationalism is very reductive, and it doesn't really give space for those people to talk about what to do.
I just don't understand how you could ever morally permit any plan of action which involves the deportation of a people based on their ethnic group, you know? I don't know if that necessarily addresses any of
that ethnic group colonized a group of people.
Oh, sure. See, notice how her response isn't about the autonomy of nation states, but is about the perceived moral wrongdoing of the group that she's talking about. There's that response has nothing to do with an autonomy-based argument and everything to do with a morally based argument.
Well, slow down. What she said, what you said, can you replay that again, just for clarity? Yeah, thank you.
That you could ever morally permit.
Talk about what to do.
I just don't understand how you could ever morally permit any plan of action which involves the deportation of a people based on their ethnic group, you know? I don't know if that necessarily addresses any of
that ethnic group colonized a group of people.
That's a psychological question.
No, Sunday, she's giving a moral defense. That has nothing to do with autonomy.
Hang on. The question you asked was, I can't imagine how somebody could. She's giving you an example of how somebody could. She's not giving her judgment as to whether how do you is moral.
Sunday.
She condemns in this conversation genocide, miscegenation laws, etc., etc.
I have talked with Nazis who have condemned these things. What relevance is the explicit answer to me?
We're talking about this conversation in particular, not her character outside of it.
No, I'm talking about how direct enunciations of things that people would still accept if their morals led to it necessarily are worthless to me. Right here, this is a moral defense. So first of all, she doesn't refute the premise. She clearly is in favor of deporting an ethnic group because her response isn't, oh, I don't think we should do that.
Slow down. That wasn't the premise, though. Review it again. The language here is particular.
Sunday.
Just play it one more time. I'm going to show you.
Sure.
That gives space for those people to have nuance in these conversations.
I just don't understand how you could ever morally permit any plan of action which involves the deportation of a people based on their ethnic group, you know? I don't know if that necessarily addresses any of that.
How could you ever morally permit any plan of action based on the deportation of people based on their ethnic group?
I'm referring to what she believes here. I'm not, this isn't out of the blue. I'm clearly referring
to what she believes here, but you're not giving sufficient argumentation to attach this particular statement as a description of what she believes here. Now, I'm perfectly willing to concede that maybe she does believe that. I don't know.
She says she believes it. Explicitly, she says it. She
does not.
She only denounces the worst characterization.
Vaush, when you say explicitly, you need to be referring to the specific language used. That's what explicitly means here. That's not the language here. That's not the content.
You would never ever do this to a person on the right. You couldn't. We would never be able to condemn anyone. We would be halfway to the gas chambers before we had a single argument to use against the Nazis.
Well, no, because they're on the right. That's the basis for the lack of charity.
She's
because they've already
on
their
the
colors.
Right, Sunday, and you admitting that the fact that she appears to be on the left is the only reason you would engage in this charitability is precisely the problem. Would we do this to Jimmy Dore or Blumenthal?
I don't show any charitability based on the fact that she's on the left. In fact,
you just said the fact that they're on the right.
If chat wants to rewind a little bit, which you can, I just said that every single person who has engaged with you on this thus far that I have seen, and that includes everybody on the screen here, has been a disingenuous slimeball. I'm not defending her character. She's been dishonest.
I'm talking explicitly about the context of this conversation and the interpretations that you're using. Which
I am talking explicitly about the context of the text. It's literally on the screen as a subtitle. Like I'm deriving this from the language used here. You're making an interpretation. It's not invalid, but it's not inevitable from the text.
You can only infer what other people... I'm not saying it's inevitable, but you would have to be psychotically dedicated to charitably framing her in order to not arrive at the obvious conclusion here. If you say, like, this is... I don't understand what like, deviation from traditional language use is leading you towards this, but this is not, like, a hard read on my part. This is not like me going out of my way. You are engaging in ridiculous levels of semantic parsing and then choosing the least likely path. You're choosing the bumpiest road, the most forest thicket-wed road out there. And the simplest path here, which I'll just play one more time.
And it doesn't really give space for those people to talk about what to do.
I just don't understand how you could ever morally permit any plan of action which involves the deportation of a people based on...
it's not running on my end. Hang on one sec.
It's the same. It's the same.
Let me catch up quickly. Hang on one moment.
It's the same. It's just the same bit. Their ethnic group, you know. I don't know if that necessarily addresses any of
that ethnic group.
What you're asking is you can't imagine how anyone would permit it. She's giving you an example of how somebody would permit it. She doesn't say. I don't know.
I'm talking about her beliefs.
You don't say her. You don't ask her specifically about you, Professor Flowers. Do you believe this? You say, I don't see how
I
you
brought her
could.
on to
She
talk
gave an
about
example of how you
her
could.
beliefs. The context of this conversation is the positions that I felt she had. Here, wait, let's rewind further. Let's rewind further. I think it's pretty clear I'm talking about her positions here.
Also reading like Frantz Fanon's Wretched of the Earth. Frantz Fanon did a lot of work.
Why don't we
in
move
Algeria,
forward to the part where she actually condemns genocide? And
I don't care. I literally don't care. It doesn't matter to me. I've talked to Nazis who condemn genocide. It doesn't matter.
But you're
lied.
Using the same evidence here.
No, I'm absolutely not. Wait, first of all, hold on. Do you think that Nick Fuentes is a Nazi? Because he has explicitly said that he thinks the Holocaust has happened, and also that Jews are like equal to non-Jews.
He's also explicitly said the opposite. Like, I have a basis for that, and he also associates with Nazis.
Wait,
like,
he's clearly said that he was joking. Wait, hold on. Associates with Nazis. Okay, we're making a lot of assumptions here. He has explicitly said that he doesn't feel those things, and he makes a lot of jokes.
I've said ad nauseum, I'm not here to defend Professor Flower's character. The problem is the language here does not inevitably lead to the inference that you are making in the context of this conversation.
Nothing can inevitably lead to an inference. It's an inference.
The inference you are making is the basis of the accusation against the logic specifically that absolves your end of it. That's the issue.
No, it's not. It's that she goes this entire conversation endorsing ethnic cleansing, but then refuses to own up to the specific language.
Never endorses ethnic cleansing.
She doesn't endorse the term ethnic cleansing because she's an idiot and the term is spooky. She's exactly like every Republican who doesn't understand that when you when you have opposition to like extra like fucking swarthy immigrants coming in, you're enacting white nationalist logic. They will denounce white nationalism, but then continue to go on and vote for politicians who will fearmonger about Mexicans coming up from the border. This is not new to me. This is like the majority of the political conversations I have. People are stupid and dishonest.
Fine. Fine. Perfectly plausible. Here's the problem. At the end of the day, you have to fall back on equivocating between should they have the ability to and should they, period.
Her response here was a moral justification, not one of sovereignty.
It's immaterial.
Here, let's just watch some of this.
Should they have the right to decide is not the same as should they have the right, period.
Morally, should they be able to? Here,
No, not morally should they be able to. In this specific context, you ask, I don't see how you could. She answers how you could. She doesn't say that she does.
Okay, if somebody asked you, I don't understand, hold on. Let's say that somebody said that you were a Nazi. Somebody got the impression from you that you are a Nazi, okay? And they bring you on their stream because you disagree with them. And they, after several minutes talking about your belief system and the proposed disagreements between the two of you, say, I just don't understand how somebody could deny the Holocaust. And you responded, after leaning into the microphone, maybe the evidence provided has been shaky and disproven by subsequent studies. Now, you could technically go, well, they're not actually denying the Holocaust. All they're doing is providing a hypothetical justification for how a person might arrive at that belief. But you would be an idiot to believe that's actually what they're doing. They're clearly signaling their intent there with the thinnest veneer of plausible deniability.
Yes, but we make that judgment because of the cultural relevance of the Holocaust in particular, not because you can't make a hypothetical like that in the course of a conversation.
She's also doing
Vaush, at the end of this conversation, she explicitly says in a moral key, you cannot do this. And she has explicitly said, I am not a black nationalist or a separatist. That signals to black nationalists and separatists, I am not one of you.
Like when Trump said he's not a racist, that means that he distinguished himself and forever lost the racist vote. When he said that he loved black people, he was so great for black people.
My understanding, and this is
immaterial, he said he was like the least racist president and the best president for black people.
My general understanding is that people in like white nationalist and righty circles generally viewed him largely as a tool, not as specifically their man.
Like Trump, he got the racist vote.
Sure. Yeah.
Can we just? I just want to watch a bit of this here.
Sure, go for it.
Starting from 10.
And there's like a lot of violence that happened there.
I'm hearing myself as well. That's why
I think like dealing with colonialism is going to be messy, and there needs to be room to have nuance in these conversations. And I think just kind of reducing it to like, oh, this is white nationalism is very reductive, and it doesn't really give space for those people to talk about what to do.
I just don't understand how you could ever morally permit any plan of action which involves the deportation of a people based on their ethnic group, you know? I don't know if that necessarily addresses any of
that ethnic group colonized a group of people.
Oh, sure, but
That's
I
how.
don't. Yeah,
That's and if we disagree on that line, that's fine. But I think
we disagree on that
Slow down,
line.
slow down, slow down. Hang on. Let that play for a little bit longer.
Sure.
I'm just
people
curious.
have to have the right to self-determination. What to do about the people who colonize them?
I agree that the ethnic group did indeed participate in the colonization, but I don't believe in taking blanket retribution against people for their bloodline because they're associated with the
It's
bloodline.
not about.
Well, it is.
You should. It's about being away from the people who oppressed you.
I don't
it's
agree
about
with
taking
that
your
either.
power back.
Yeah, because she didn't like the word bloodline, and then she said
it's because Vaush, you hit it on the head a second ago. She's an idiot. She thinks you can do this without that. She is wrong. That doesn't mean she endorses the thing that would happen. She's mistaken about what's in their power to do.
That's my point. My point is that she's not intelligent enough to realize that her priors lead to genocide. Here, hold on, wait, chat, hold on, just a second. Chat's giving me time codes. Hold on.
Some people who oppress you.
Yeah,
that's what I'm
you
saying.
can do that without deportation.
That context should be a lens where you.
Yeah, she's probably going to go on for a fucking while. 5308, 1 second.
I mean, the thing's like almost 3 hours, isn't it?
Yeah, it's pretty long. I just think it makes you insufferable and sociologically ignorant. Now, I'll ask you again. When it comes to South Africa, what do you think of the 6 million white people who live in that country? Do you think the black people, who are by far the majority, have a right to remove the white population?
I personally don't think that would be a good idea, but I do think that
do they have a right
it's up to. Yeah, I think so. I think they have the right to discuss what to do about that, and if that means that they have to.
When she says right to discuss what to do about that, do you really think she means?
Hang on 1 second. Sorry, I had paused it because we were talking.
Gotcha.
And then I unpaused again, so I wasn't following that thing, unfortunately. Here, do you want to try that again? Sorry.
Okay.
So sorry.
When she says the right to discuss what to do about that, do you think that she's really talking about the autonomy to have a conversation? Like she's talking about the abstract ability for humans to have conversations, as opposed to the alternative, which would be, again, mind control? Or do you think she's saying that morally there's a right here to sort of, like make the decision to engage in ethnic cleansing?
It looks to me like she's invoking a democratic principle where the decision is held by a number of parties in concert. That's what that reads to me.
Okay.
Again, like the logic of this is going to be very downstream from anti-colonial stuff that is entirely conversant with what I'm talking about here. She doesn't understand
anti-colonial theory.
It's not required that she does for her to follow that logic. That's where she's getting it from. But she's a reader of Fanon, et cetera, et cetera. Like she's reading people who have read Hegel. She's getting stuff she doesn't understand. I understand it. That's my point.
So 1 second. Let me finish this through.
Okay.
Do you think that
they have a right
it's
to?
Up to? Yeah, I think so. I think they have the right to discuss what to do about that, and if that means that they have to remove the people,
actually, no.
then I think
Someone
they
in
would have
chat
a right
says that she hasn't read theory. It's actually worse than that. She's read a bit of theory.
That's true. That is worse.
Do that, but I think that would be really harsh, and I think that they're not even going to do that.
Out of curiosity, do you know how many Jews died in the Holocaust? Doubter. Okay, hold on. There's this one other clip people keep linking. 20603. 1 second. So
it'll get better with time if she doesn't fall in with Luna way too close.
She will. They're not really distinguishable politically. 33, not 03? Okay.
Yeah. People.
I think deporting white people from South Africa is the nuclear option. There are 6 million whites in South Africa, not America, which is significantly more people than the number that we killed in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It seems to me like if you're willing to accept that you should act against colonialism up to a point, but past a certain point, the ethics of it grow worse than than whatever benefits you could accrue through decolonization, then I would say, following that assumption, you could never argue ethically for an ethno-state. That it would always be an unjustifiable extreme. That there are always ways to address colonization without going as far as excluding an entire racial group, you know?
I don't necessarily think so. Like, there are people, like, I don't understand, like, why you couldn't have, like, a certain space where it's, like, Black people live there and Black people are like, we only want to live here because we want to stay away from people who have oppressed us.
Oh, well.
Like, I don't understand. Like, there are places that already have most Black people. And I don't know why you can't just be like, okay, this is going to be, like, a Black, like, area that's, like...
This is a Black ethno-state.
Yeah.
It's a Black ethno-state. The
No,
area
she's saying hypothetically, like there's no reason why you couldn't have in an area where racial homogeneity of a certain kind is already achieved. You couldn't again like establish that without going down the genocidal route. That seems sort of logical. I don't see the inconsistency in this particular case.
she's
I mean, I
she's
can
clearly
conjecture reasons why that would be bad. I would probably agree with you in my assessment of that against her.
but she's
she's not
defending an
endorsing it here.
ethno-state.
Well, no, she's like, if, for example, if there was a disease that wiped out all white people on Earth,
she's
and
talking about forming an ethno-state.
no, she conjectured that there is a way imaginable to have an effective ethno-state without mass deportations or genocide. And in the event that the other people, whoever they are already gone, that seems trivial.
Let's watch a little bit more.
A safe haven for Black people. But I do think I will like say that like, yeah, I guess
that's an ethno-state.
I don't think.
Oh God damn it! I didn't put the audio on again.
This is what I mean about you being less mask on than white nationalists. They're usually not willing to just
right. Like
that.
I said in my video, there's a difference between people who are like, I want to be in my own state because I'm oppressed by people versus people who are like, well, these people are inferior. And
see, her only distinction between what the Nazis did and what she wants to do is that she's not the oppressor beforehand. That's it. The only distinction between the system she doesn't want to be compared to and her own is that she's already part of the oppressed racial group. That's it. That's the only distinction that exists.
Well, that's the distinction in terms of how we judge people in a society
it
today
absolutely
who are not
does
empowered
not
to do so.
I don't think it's more okay for a Black person to do a murder.
Well, hang on. Then why is she so hell-bent on conjecturing about humane, quote unquote, I disagree, humane ways to achieve the same result?
Have you ever heard a Nazi talk about white ethno-states? Their main thing, Richard Spencer's main thing throughout 2016 was, I'm not a white supremacist, I'm just a white nationalist. Obviously, I wouldn't advocate for any political policies that would hurt people. I just think, that we should have the right to self-determination. These are open Nazis. Jared Taylor did this shit. They all did this. The Nazis did this. Originally, they didn't do the Holocaust. I understand. They all do this.
Listen, I understand. And we vetted those statements against their behavior and who they interact with, and they're very bad people. But in the context of this conversation, that is not an upshot of that statement.
But how? Why, when she's doing anything and everything of all the Nazis I've talked to, all the language, all the talking points, all of the rhetoric is coming out. What about her? What is it that affords the charitability that isn't her skin tone or her gender? Because that's the only reason that any of this.
Vaush.
Wait, no. Wait, hold on.
About her. I'm talking about the logic of the conversation.
The logic of the conversation is one in which you explicitly said you would afford less charitability if you knew a person was conservative. I saw her content. Her content advocated for ethno-states.
In terms of judging the person, if this was my first exposure to someone, I would judge them by their words. The judgments we make about Nazis,
these are the words
of names, are biographical and historical and have to do with who they associate with and what else they do. That proves the falsity of their words.
These are the words of ethno-state defenders. This convo is all I need. It's all I would ever need.
Well, no, this is just the language of discussing ethno-states and states generally. This is the stuff that we're dealing with.
With one person taking a pro and one person taking an against side. This isn't a neutral.
Take a pro side. She doesn't take a pro side.
She's like, Sunday. She, in every imaginable way, outside explicitly saying, I support following by the term that lefties don't like, so ethnic cleansing or ethno-states or whatever, in every other imaginable way, she has defended everything. The language is the same. The right to racial self-determination, the idea that it would be better for all races involved because it would lead to more peace, the idea that, I wouldn't agree with it, but, morally, maybe it wouldn't be so bad, ethnic cleansing, the talking about how, you could form an ethno-state with minimal violence. I've talked to white ethno-staters who say this exactly. It's like verbatim, point per point, Why don't we just take an area like Minnesota where it's mostly white people or whatever, and we could make that an ethno-state, and I don't want any violence or anything. It is the same. She's not on the left. She's just a pro-black conservative who happens to affect her political positions through the language of leftism. We have this generally. They're called Strasserites. They seem like lefties, but then if you bury under the surface, all of their aesthetically left-leaning positions are really just a way of delivering their core set of values, which is usually Nazism. I've dealt with this before. Like, she's not exceptional to me. The only thing exceptional about this is the lengths people will go to defend her. I don't understand. It makes me feel gaslit.
I'm not defending her. I'm perfectly willing to concede that there's a distinct possibility she is exactly as you describe. I don't care about that. The issue here is that when we take this particular reading of this material here, we blanketly condemn other people who are, again, simply taking an anti-colonial stance without further specification after the fact. And we are also sanitizing existing ethnostates that exist now. Because what we have now are states established by the history of colonialism and racism, etc., that have deployed exactly the thing that she says other people should have the right to do too. I disagree that they should have the right to be able to do these things. I think that's a very terrible way to organize a community that inevitably leads somewhere down the line to something disastrous. We are on the same page there. The problem, again, is that by taking this particular tack, you sanitize one side and condemn a bunch of other people for playing the same game everybody else is playing. It's not fair. That's it.
No,
we are on the same side
talking
otherwise.
About autonomy. No, at no point anywhere ever in this convo or elsewhere do I say anything which even implies that I'm suggesting that recently decolonized countries or countries that are mostly controlled by ethnic minorities should have some kind of state limiter placed on them. That never comes up. The idea that the language we're using here is denying them the ability to play the same game is just completely off. This is the language of supremacy just for the other side. It's not like this doesn't happen. There are plenty of political leaders all throughout like Africa where black supremacy is more common than it here is in the United States who use language that's pretty similar to white supremacists here. It's just a problem with our brains, human brains.
Well, I don't think it's a problem with their brains. I think it's very historically contingent. I think it is ubiquitous, but that's beside the point. Look, the drain we're circling here is because you really, really strongly feel that a specific interpretation of the language that doesn't derive from the language at this juncture.
It derives directly from the language. Do not invalidate my interpretation of
you sustain that. I do defy that interpretation, but fair enough. At this juncture, I don't think we're going to reach a resolution on this. I would just invite people again to review the material themselves and listen very carefully to the logic of it and make a decision.
Can you I should just do like a compile tour where I bring lefties on and I ask them, like, do you think Nazis had the right to do the Holocaust? And nobody is ever going to say yes. Ever. It will never happen unless they pre-watch. If they know what I'm doing, they might. But if you could surprise them, they never will. Because when people talk like this, and the language used in this convo, we're so clearly talking about ethics. None of the conversations that we're having here are about national autonomy. I don't bring up national autonomy.
It is ethics with respect to autonomy.
No,
should they be able to have the right? No, should they be able to have the right? The autonomy is explicitly what is in suspension.
Every nation state has the autonomy. When we talk about the right, if I meant autonomy, I would say no. This wasn't a convo about nation states. It was about ethnic cleansing. If I was talking about autonomy, I would have said autonomy.
Vaush, ethnic cleansing from what? At the behest of what?
You can do ethnic cleansing without the behest of a state or with statecraft. It's happened before. I'm not talking about there is. Can you name one country on Earth right now that does not have the autonomy to commit a genocide within its own borders?
In the context, hang on. In the context of talking about ethnostates, that's exactly what we're talking about.
No, America isn't an ethnostate, and it has the autonomy to do whatever it wants within its borders.
No, it's not that only ethnostates can have that, but the danger here specifically is that to be an ethnostate, it has to exercise that power in particular. That's why it comes up in this conversation.
Every institution does. Don't you think it would be a bit silly for us to have had a 2-hour conversation where we're talking about autonomy, in which no one ever explicitly mentions autonomy, and also there's no alternative to the position that I've taken?
Self-determination is synonymous with autonomy.
Self-determination is a dog whistle. It's autonomy for an ethnic group.
Self-determination is a dog whistle.
No.
We talk about the self-determination of classes. We talk about the self-determination of all sorts of things.
Which country doesn't have the autonomy to conduct a genocide within its own borders right now? What hypothetical position am I invoking here? Considering the fact that in the whole entirety of my discussion, not only am I explicitly acknowledged the fact that America and other countries have committed ethnic cleansing, not only have I acknowledged the fact that this is a ubiquitous problem that happens all over the place, not only the fact that I never mention autonomy, and I never even posit a situation by which you could impede upon the autonomy of another country, and the fact that we're both clearly talking about ethics because she's issuing ethical defenses for this position, not ethical defenses for the autonomy of a nation being able to do this. In spite of all of that, I'm meant to assume that she's taking the interpretation which you, by your own admission, acknowledge she wouldn't take if you were to ask her the same question about whether or not the Nazis had a right to do the Holocaust, a question which I've never heard answered. No, Sunday. Sunday, you didn't. You changed the language, and even with the language change, she still said no. If you had used my language, she would have said no, and she would have responded to it as though it was a moral question. If you asked her, hey, do you think Trump had the right to kill all trans people?
Explicitly as a moral question. Because asked explicitly as a moral question.
No, if you had asked it in my phrasing, you would have gotten an answer as though it was a moral question, because it is a moral question, because everyone treats it as a moral question. And in all my time doing this, and the hundreds of people that I've talked to, the thousands of convos that I've seen,
the way in which I asked includes that one. Like it's the reason why I asked in the way that I did is specifically because it would include all possible permutations.
The sample. If you had asked as I had asked, used the language I had used, she would have said no. Because to her, it's a moral question.
Restate for clarity the language that you used.
Do you think Nazi Germany had the right to do the Holocaust?
Thank you. Now substantiate the claim you made against me.
If you had asked her that question, she would have said no.
Of course.
Because it's a moral question. Not one of autonomy. It's about whether it's morally permissible.
No, because at that point, we're talking about a historical event, not a hypothetical. We are talking about should they have been allowed to.
So, so by your logic, then, it would be whether or not we believe that Germany should have had the national autonomy to conduct the Holocaust.
But the reasoning for why would have been different. It would have been, no, we shouldn't let them have the decision because we know what decision they will make.
No, because in the hypothetical about the ethnic cleansing, we're talking about them doing the ethnic cleansing. There is no circumstance by which I could move you off this point. I have never in my life heard anyone respond to that question as though it was an autonomy thing.
The mistake that she is making isn't thinking that it could end up being anything else other than something in the vein of the Holocaust. She conjectures that you could do something humane. She is not making the point you think she is making. You're just wrong on this.
She's defending ethnic cleansing.
If you're not going to be budged, you're not going to be budged.
No, there's nothing to budge on. She is using the language of ethnic supremacists to defend ethnic cleansing. Oh, wait, hold on. Sorry. Hold on. People in chat were linking this video. 1 second.
This is a separate video.
It is a separate video. But considering the fact that we're...
from yours, and I've already argued that I believe that she made a mistake afterwards, took on your logic, flipped it around, and defended the reverse.
Why is it a mistake? Why can't it just be revealing? Why? So wait, hold on. I'm going to lose it, man. You are the one engaging...
People change as they think.
You are the one engaging in an unjustifiable inference by framing her becoming more revealing in how bad her positions are later as a mistake, as a product of the conversation.
You're not doing something distinct by arguing the reverse.
Excuse me?
I said you're not doing anything distinct by asserting the reverse of that.
So, hold on. So you're chastising me for making the inference that we were having a moral conversation when I kept saying moral and all we were talking about was morals and no one ever mentioned autonomy.
You say moral in one case. For the rest of the conversation, we are talking about should they be able to have the right? Should they be able to make a decision?
The moral right.
You don't talk about should they be able when we're talking about
moral comes up 23 times in the transcript Control F. So you're free to rewatch. Anyway, here. Just a second.
Me to my next point. Though we've established that genocide and retribution are not even topics that colonized people are entertaining, what exactly is genocide? During the debate, I was genuinely unsure if removing colonizers is genocide. What I understood about genocide is that it can be tricky to determine. Much of my understanding of it came from the Rohingya genocide, where their oppression wasn't considered genocide by the UN until 2017.
So, in this, she's indicating that she doesn't believe that, like, ethnic cleansing is genocide. Technically, they don't mean exactly the same thing, but I feel like semantically we can acknowledge that she wouldn't be then defending the assertion that it is ethnic cleansing, but not genocide. Yeah, hold on.
So is removing colonizers genocide? I really wasn't sure. I should have just said, I'm not sure what the definitions of genocide are, paused to look it up, and discussed it from there, instead of me responding with, I'm not sure, or I think that's okay, as any sense of uncertainty was seen as evidence of me being pro-genocide, and someone who was all too close to white nationalism, but naively couldn't see it. So after the debate, I looked up if violent decolonization is considered genocide. I didn't find a clear answer on that, but what I did find—
Violent decolonization.
I looked up if violent decolonization is considered genocide. I didn't find a clear answer on that, but what I—
By the way, violent decolonization is a dog whistle here because we were talking about the removal of millions of white people from South Africa, which is not a current colonial group. They have been there for hundreds of years. South Africa is a democracy. It is one with a severe history of apartheid and racial domination. That is not to assume or to say that races are equal or treated equally. In South Africa, they are not. White people still, in spite of being a numerical minority.
Hang on. Like, in terms of her equivocation between white people and colonizer, I think that's a category error.
Nothing that you would do to South Africa right now would be decolonization. There's no colonial empire that's enforcing their will right now.
Not necessarily, because when we're talking about colonialism, right, we aren't necessarily talking about in like the old sense of a literal colony by an empire state. What we're talking about is sort of the residual logic institutions of that.
I am absolutely talking about the former, because the alternative is, again, colonizer equals race group. The majority of the white people in South Africa.
Hang on. There's another easy alternative, which again, she doesn't specify because she again conflates a demographic group with colonizer, and I think that's a horrendous error. What you could do is you could say like the specific modes of organization, specific relations of production, et cetera, like the way in which people relate to each other in a community. That can be downstream from the cultural hegemony of a colonizing power. And to the extent that that erases other groups that were, again, abused by that colonizing power, decolonization along those lines is something that has some merit, depending on what lengths you go to achieve that. That's a separate question. I'm just saying here, I disagree with her take that when she equivocates between white people, like it would be like saying like whiteness as an element of colonization. That's accurate. White people, like assuming that category and then specifying people again as a part of that category and saying those are the colonizers. Perversely, it's actually following on from the logic of colonization. It does open the door again to abusing specific demographics along those lines, using colonial state power. That's why I disagree with it. I think she's making a mistake there. That's my point. I'm in agreement with you on that.
I think she's racist. I don't know why all the shit she does that's bad is a mistake. It seems odd to me, like kind of an invalidation of her autonomy.
Well, no. In that respect, yes, she is adopting precisely the same racism that is consistent with.
I would never refer to that as a mistake. You know, I
wouldn't characterize her as a Nick Fuentes type on those grounds. I think it opens the door, but I don't think she's all the way there yet. There are like gradations here, right? Like
we can middle ground that.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we can middle ground. You don't have to be Nick Fuentes for like when a person says or does racist things for it to not just be a mistake.
Look, all I'm saying is like let's leave some room for people to like learn and figure shit out, right?
Sure, and she can grow all she wants, man. If she ever renounces all this shit, she's free to come on my stream and we can talk and have a friendly convo.
I would urge her to prepare extraordinarily hard and do just that at some point. Not right now, God, no. I don't think she's ready at all. But I would conjecture I wouldn't necessarily put it past her indefinitely. I'm pessimistic. Don't get me wrong, but it's possible.
She won't move past. Why would she want to? She's racist. She's fine with this. Like this is the desirable end state for her. This isn't a series. These positions of hers
I don't think she's racist in that way. I don't think she's bigoted against white people. I think the problem is she's adopting a categorization scheme that tends to that. But I don't think her heart's there. Does that make sense?
I mean, she's like quintupled down on it. I don't know.
I think she's quintupled down on it because her conversation with you went badly. She was spooked by it, and she's obsessing over it.
Man, I was pretty fucking kind to her in that.
And yes, and again, considering that she came at you with the intention to belittle and attack you, I can't condemn you for not reciprocating, and to the extent that you didn't, I mean, good on you. Like, you don't have a moral obligation to be generous to someone who's trying to, shank you in the street or whatever. But like,
I just finished this little bit.
Yeah.
Definition was this. Genocide is A, killing members of the group, B, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, C, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, D, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, E, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. For the legal definition, the intent is a deciding factor, and there must...
This is true. The UN definition of genocide...
Oh, sorry.
The UN definition of genocide has categories requiring that don't include forced displacement necessarily, but that still fits under the purview of ethnic cleansing.
Be a proven intent on the part of perpetrators to physically...
I don't like using UN definitions. I don't think they're not following inherently down from the logic of the categories that we deploy.
They're not perfect. No.
A national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. Cultural destruction does not suffice, nor does it intention to simply disperse a group. Also, the victims of genocide must be deliberately targeted, not randomly, because of their real or perceived membership of one of the 4 groups protested under the convention, which again are national, ethnic, racial, and religious groups. After reading this, something that struck me as really frustrating was that the gotcha moment where my views were compared to genocide didn't constitute as a legal definition of genocide, which Vaush specifically references. As I've said, there are non-violent ways that you can remove colonizers from your country, and simply removing them isn't genocide.
I think there's an argument there insofar as you rely upon like conventional equivocations between these different types of things as evidence that something is should be construed as genocide in the course of conversation.
It seems like
I get where she's coming from there.
I mean, it seems like she's running away from the term genocide, and she's like, well, now that it's only ethnic cleansing, like, yeah, we can do it.
Well, I mean, of course she is. The question is, does she successfully do so, right? Like, it's... Well, let's continue. I actually haven't seen this in a little while. Let's keep on going.
It certainly could be. It's not something that I want to focus on.
I'm not even arguing with you at this juncture. I'm just curious what the logic is.
I think she doesn't like white people.
Too much, because at the end of the day, I'm not advocating for the removal of white South Africans. And I don't think that black South Africans are either. The reason why I'm saying this is because this was supposed to be the gotcha
it's factually incorrect. There
absolutely
are black South Africans who are.
Someone to promote a genocide unless they were certain that it was. Because that would be really shitty, right? And thousands of people went with this too and ripped into me for this on something they themselves didn't understand. It's just like, I've tried to think of what to say for this part, but I'm just at a loss for words. Seriously, you can just go fuck yourself. But let's not stop there. There's more to understand when it comes to genocide. The legal definition of genocide conveniently leaves out colonialism. It's important to note that when the UN adopted the legal definition, the only African states present were...
This is a fair criticism of UN biases.
Cut. It seems that many of those who study genocide would say that it can be more complicated than that, especially around anti-colonialist violence. The road to decolonization is extremely complicated, and we should handle each situation with care. We should seek our understanding from those who study colonialism and those who are facing it. We should seek to support colonized people rather than making unrealistic hypotheticals about genocide that spread mistrust of colonized people.
The only thing here that spread mistrust of colonized people is Professor Flowers, man. I feel like I'm holding the torch for all fucking indigenous people in the world, and there are a bunch of goddamn lefties who are fucking LARPing about how much they hate white people or trying to blow it out. Jesus. It's fucking weird.
All for the purpose of winning a debate. Now, at this point, some of you might be thinking, these are some good points, Lua. Why didn't you bring this up in the debate? Well, that would have been great if I had known that's what we'd be debating.
Okay, I think she complains for a while. Wait, hold on. I'm just looking through the fucking links the chat dropped. I don't even know what point they're meant to convey. I'm just looking.
I think they have the right to discuss what to do about that.
Oh, we looked at this one.
Okay, but the first part, it's like, I think like mass just like killing people, like having it like a literal genocide. I'm like, yeah, that would be messed up. But then me just saying like, there might have to be a time where people get rid of the people who are colonized. Like that's not the same as just like having like a mass genocide.
Well, like, you know, getting rid of is a very wide term that can be applied in a number of ways.
Like, again, I gave the example of Kenya, who are like able to get rid of their colonizers.
I explicitly asked you about the mass deportation of the 6 million white people in South Africa, and you said that it was the right of black South Africans to do that. You're saying that they have a right to commit a genocide. That's a pro-genocide stance as far as I'm concerned.
I think they have the right to at least figure out if they want the colonizers to be there or not, and like how to do that process. But
If anything else, this should put to bed any idea that she doesn't equivocate all white people and colonizers, because I just said 6 million white people, and she immediately, with no pause,
yeah, no, I don't think you're off base there. I think that equivocation is I think she makes that equivocation. I disagreed with that. No, we don't have an argument on this point.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I take issue with the idea that me being opposed to ethno-states means that I'm like toxic towards black content creators.
But it's not just like you being oppressed to ethno-states, because I think for me, like, even if like people got rid of like the white South Africans in South Africa, I think there's like ways that could...
Oh, there we go. Huh?
Can I just note something quickly? And this is probably going to come off as a bit off color, and I apologize.
Hit me up.
Her language is breaking down here. This is a person who is extraordinarily stressed. She's losing coherence. She's making sentences that aren't really properly structured. This is a person who's under a lot of pressure. Like there's a point here where being minimally charitable with what she is attempting to say
I wish she
is
had
appropriate. I mean, it would have simplified things. It would made that read a lot more clear, but
yeah, it would have been, I don't know, funny.
No, to be clear, I'm not saying that you behaved inappropriately in that conversation. She came at you to hurt you. When I asked her what the logic was of doing so, she said that was to dunk on you. Like you're perfectly within your rights to respond in kind. I don't have an issue with that.
All right, yeah. The stream is always the Thunderdome. Here, one second.
Could happen that would be really messed up, but I do think it's for the Black South Africans to figure out like how to do that in general. I guess I will say that there are some lines that definitely can be crossed, but that's not even just what I'm saying. Like what I'm saying is that like people who just disagree with you, you can't help but compare them to white nationalists. Well, and that's a huge issue.
Only if they sound like white nationalists. I disagree with lots of people who I don't call white nationalists. I try to...
Like you were saying that No Name is a segregationist just because No Name said that this tweet isn't for white people.
But I have defended the language that I've used, but I do not think... And probably anything from this point, she's going to get too incoherent. Wait, what? Saying that... in the modern economic age, we aren't we don't do colonization by sending like boats over to colonize lands or anything like that.
The rights to nuke people from the people who oppress them.
I just personally, I think what you're saying is worse than any of those things. I think a person who says ethno-states are okay is on a much worse level than your average anti-Semite, sexist, racist, transphobe, whatever. Ethno-states are the most destructive creation like that has ever been born of man. More harm has been created as a product of ethno-states than possibly any other socio-political construct to have ever existed. Whether the people who construct them are the oppressed or the oppressor, white or black, whatever. This is like these are like.
Is it improper to respond to your chat quickly? It's just a thing going through that I'm a little bit disagreeing with.
Hit them up.
Yeah. There are people who are characterizing, like describing Professor Flowers in a certain moment as being stressed or as being incoherent or whatever. I don't think that's infantilizing. That happens to literally all of us. It's happened to you, Vaush, as a matter of fact, in your conversation with Sargon, and you've improved radically as a result of acknowledging that. I don't think making inferences one way or the other about a person's psychological state in the third person is necessarily infantilizing them. I think we're all vulnerable to those things. And frankly, it's the best we can do. Being charitable is doing precisely that in any situation, whether appropriately or not. It's not infantilizing to do that, I think. I think that's a misconstrual.
I agree that it's not infantilizing. Here, I think we're almost, I'm just... Yeah. And the idea that black people are Africans. Black Africans aren't like black Africans.
That they don't want to be around white people. And I understand why people incredible...
direction to go in. What if white people...
I think it is a very incredible, wild direction to go in. But I think my point is that I can understand why people are so fed up with racism that they don't want to be around white people. And I think that if
ever that was an oxymoron, Jesus Christ. I'm done with racism. Let's get away from this race.
I mean, to be fair, and this is the point that I would make in terms of understanding alone, I'm making a very modest point here. You would judge someone slightly differently for playing a game that their group in particular benefits from, and again, like helping to reproduce it and perpetuate it versus a group that is forced by the predominance of that game to play when they are fooled into treating it as essentially true.
I don't think it's a game anyone has to play. I feel like,
I agree.
Especially, like, this might be the case if I was talking just to some, like, random black person. Like, if I was walking around in LA and I found some like random black guy, and we were talking about race, and he was like, I don't really trust white people, you know, I don't know, my whole life's like I've been dealing with this shit, and you know, I understand it's like free and equal and all, but it doesn't feel that way, whatever. I'd probably be pretty charitable to that person because I understand that they've had some pretty legit shit happen that would affect their biases and stuff. But Professor Flowers, first of all, the average person who's fed up with racism doesn't go defend ethno-states. That's a whole other thing. And second of all, Professor Flowers postures as like a fairly educated, like online advocate for leftism, an ideology which is supposed to be against racial separatism or supremacy. So in this case, I feel like she's holding herself to a much higher standard, or at least she has to be held to a much higher standard.
Okay, well, I think I can think of a way in which we meet each other halfway here, because consistently the charge against you defy it as being appropriate, fair enough, has been that your read on this, or your apparatus for discerning what people are saying and their motives, is in some sense off base. So how about this? Let's assume, for argument's sake, you encounter that exact same black individual. They're sort of distrustful of white people. They've dealt with this shit all their life. They see Black Panther, whatever, and they imagine, yeah, it'd be kind of cool if we had a sovereign state like Wakanda somewhere secret in Africa or whatever. And they are naive about the mechanisms that would be required to actuate something along those lines, and therefore argue for, hey, I think that would be a swell idea. Would you agree that characterizing that person as equivalent to a snake like Nick Fuentes is a little bit over the top?
Well, it would depend on how they defend their arguments. I don't think that
we're leaving. Let's take that by itself. I'm not defending Flowers here. Okay, let's assume Professor Flowers is the worst person alive. That should be an easy thesis for you. Let's go with that one.
But we're not talking about Flowers. We're talking about this random person.
Yes.
It would really depend on how they frame things. So, for example, if I had a 3-hour conversation with them where I was like trying to explain how the logic of their positions led to X or Y, and they would still flip-flop in between saying they didn't support a thing, but would also go like, well, I wouldn't mind if it didn't not happen, you know. I would say that's pretty bad, yeah. I think what you're describing right now is an earnest effort to avoid racism, which leads to bad conclusions. And I think that's something which can be defended, not in the conclusions which you're brought to, but rather in the sentiment which leads you to those conclusions to begin with. And I think that's something worth like tackling with some degree of charitability. After all, the reasons why a black person who's dealt with racism their whole life might look up to, say, Wakanda as like a concept, though of course it opened up at the end of the movie.
Ridiculous.
Right, right, yeah, you know what I mean. Are usually pretty different from like a white person who wants a white ethno-state. White ethno-states, when they're conceptualized by, you know, like racists or whatever, are usually built into them is contempt and hatred and political ostracization, not a desire to be left alone. The language of wanting to be left alone is often invoked, and in doing so, they have to invent conspiracy theories, where the white man is constantly besieged by minorities and Jews, and that's the oppression they're fleeing from. But black people don't have to invent anything. They can point to what's actually happening and go, you know, that kind of sucks and I want to be away from it. And the fact that they don't have to engage in any malice or dishonesty in order to construct the narrative by which their ethno-state would be preferred, that does offer me some level of proceeding charitability. I acknowledge that. But the arguments you use to justify it, the way you run into it, the language Professor Flowers used here wasn't the casual, idyllic language of somebody who genuinely hopes for a world where people of dark skin tones don't have to face racism. The language she used was the codified, calculated language of an ethnic supremacist. She used the dog whistle, she used the plausible deniability, she framed things in a way which would allow her to maximize the perceived legitimacy of her positions while avoiding taking account
I don't mean to cut you off, just I wanted to, there was a point to what I was asking though. So you would agree that some of these more benign examples, a black person just says, oh, that would be nice, they nonetheless categorically want an ethno-state. They're wrong about what that would actually look like. But they would be categorized in that limited sense as being, yeah, these are people who might think to themselves, what am I? Oh, I'm a black nationalist. I think that'd be a swell idea. Or I'm a black separatist or whatever. I think that'd be a swell idea. These are not equivalent to white nationalists in and of themselves, pending, again, that experience of them engaging in this snake-like behavior that exposes like a deep-seated hatred motivating
not in their core. but the
Yes.
political systems that are used to construct those movements are identical, or at least very close together. So depending on how deep in the sauce one is, so to speak, that would be the distinguishing characteristic here. The core disagreement, the fundamental, the spark, the discontent, where it originates, one of them is inherently unjustifiable, and another one is at least rooted in legitimate grievance. And that means something, but the political mechanisms that you use to go about fulfilling those objectives are ultimately, just because geopolitics doesn't really change that much, no matter what your skin tone is, it's just a matter of power and how to accrue it, are still pretty bad, you know?
Okay, we are 100% on the same page here. The issue here is that in this conversation, I know you defy this, it very much gave the impression to myself and a lot of other people whose judgment I respect that you were making a de facto blanket statement about those people as well. If you're not, if you're willing to just say, I do not treat those people in the same way, those people are different, then you and I have no disagreement. We are fine.
I guess the issue is that the people who would disagree with me on this would set that line farther from where I would set that line.
Immaterial. You're talking to me. Just
Well, I don't know what you believe, but no, I no, the core, the root is how do I analogize this properly?
Oh, I won't defend Black Hammer. Are you kidding? No. Sorry, somebody in your chat said that.
Oh yeah, no, he isn't saying that. Okay. How do I?
Look, leave open the possibility that someone could match the description you gave in this video and nonetheless not be as you condemned them in the video. Like you're in the heat of the moment. Look,
like somebody at her level, somebody at her level is lost to me. People before where she is could be more defensible to me than people who engage in sort of the initial white nationalist sentiment. But once you've gotten to the point where you're using the language and the dog whistles, the terminology, et cetera, like at that point, like whatever core, like, so for example, I could extend this the other direction as well, okay? Because I think that different kinds of racism are different levels of morally impugnable. All of them are, but different types to different levels. So for example, okay, when I was in high school, I knew a white kid who grew up in East Los Angeles. East LA is A, not a very wealthy part of town, and B, not the whitest part of town. But the kid who I knew was white. He was also a bit racist. Now, his racism stemmed not from some broad, grandiose political malice or anything like that. His racism stemmed from the fact that he had, just speaking frankly, just shitty black neighbors. Really, that was it. The guy didn't have much of an education to call upon. He didn't have his world wasn't very large. He knew the people who he knew, and he formed the biases that he formed. And eventually, he got over it. By the time he was graduated from high school, I think he was pretty much fine. And that's awesome, you know? But I think there is a categorical difference between where his mind was at when he was 15, 16, and where a person's mind might be at if their racism, their anti-black bigotry, even at the same age, even with no guarantee of it changing in the future, was formed by some kind of deliberate contempt, a sense of supremacy. See, he never felt white supremacy. He wasn't a white supremacist. He didn't like, you know, it was one of those, oh, it's the culture arguments, you know. Of course that's a racist argument because it's tied up in so many presumptions and cultural codifiers that ultimately the outcome's roughly the same. But I do think there's a difference between a person who's racist because their world is small, their mind is small, and they've just had some bad experiences, and a person who's racist because they think that they as a group are categorically superior to another group of people. And that's two white people both racist against black people. I only want to say here, I'm capable of meting out this distinction. I do think there are meaningful differences, if for no other reason than because you can talk to these people in different ways. There are different strategies that you could use to change their mind. It's never good, but some are worse. And I know that threshold of not acceptability, of charitability would extend farther the more
threshold. Just to clarify for myself what you're saying, the threshold beyond which, because we agree that the practical upshot of wanting that thing, like an ethno state in this case, it will inevitably descend to something in the ballpark of the worst possible outcome. That is at the very least my baseline assumption.
Every time, yes.
Yeah. So we're assuming that there is a threshold of awareness past which someone has to decide that that is acceptable in order to sustain that as an ideal in their heads.
Mm-hmm. And my worry is
after that we're not.
And I will never accept it, but there's definitely going to be a difference to yeah. And the problem is, and this is my worry with the left, right? Okay, I feel like the fact that many people on the left recognize that there's a difference between those things, resentment that a black kid might have towards white people because of real experiences versus like a white person's contempt towards black people for broader political stuff. I worry that a lot of people on the left have taken that logic to the point where they're unwilling to recognize what racism looks like when it comes from black people, or unwilling to condemn it. Because I've seen people who have treated Professor Flowers' positions that way. Like, oh, well, she's had these experiences and, you know, black people have had it rough and so on. And you know what? They have. But she's also a full grown-ass woman who talks politics on YouTube. And also, like, we had a protracted conversation in which any, you know, bad positions had all the time in the world to be sandblasted off. So she's nowhere near that point to me, but I think a lot of people think that. They think, oh, because there's some sentimental undercurrent. Well, no, fuck you. No, I don't care anymore. At this point, eventually, responsibility has to be taken.
Yeah. Okay, moving back to the previous point, though. I agree with that fear. I've seen it myself. I think we have the same viewpoint with respect to that. There's definitely an attitude of permissibility with respect to bigotry in certain spaces. Actually, I don't want to go on endlessly about this in particular, but just as an additional note, I did manage to extract from Flowers a condemnation of that as well in my video. I suggest looking at that at some point at your leisure, not your chat. It's very boring. But with respect to that other thing, the danger here, and this is where I can have a little bit of sympathy at the very least with the approach of a lot of people, not Flowers in particular, but in that ballpark, is that in treating that bigotry, irrespective of who holds it in the similar way, adjoined to that is frequently going to be an intensification of the specific mechanisms that produced it in that case. That would be the fear there. I'm in agreement with you. Equally bad. A person is equally condemnable on like the most abstract grounds as an assemblage of human qualities if they are bigoted in that way. But you deal with it differently depending on who you're talking about. And of course, you would make more fine-grained distinctions than just race by itself. You'd be like, that's where the whole intersectionality thing would come in. But like, I think we're more or less on the same point about that, on the same plane when it comes to that thing. I don't like that word, but whatever. I think again, like there are ways to problematize that I think you would actually agree with. My only worry here is that, and I don't think you're unjustified in this, we're not going to harp on this for much longer, we've been going on forever. My only worry is that the way in which people have treated you, and I can't fault you for it as a result, the way people have treated you has tended to inculcating a kind of reflexive uncharitability on your part. I'm not saying in this particular case we're done arguing about it. I would just strongly advise you to watch out for that to the extent that you can, because I will say this, I disagree with your read on this. I think the reads that have been made of you from people that Professor Flowers, to my disdain, has associated with, including people like Luna Oi, Non-Compete, etc., even Noah, like I had him on stream, I vehemently disagreed with his characterization of your points. That's I don't necessarily fault him for that, because I have a sense of where he got those arguments from. I think he took them on faith, which was a mistake. His fault for doing so, but I don't think he intended malice by that. I hope he took down the video, so that bodes well. I think that they have treated you with abominable cruelty and disregard, and I think they have forgotten basically that you're a person, or they have not cared. So I have absolutely no truck with that whatsoever. I would very much like to see you exhibit the opposite. That's the upshot of all of this.
If it's any consolation, I swear to God, okay, if Professor Flowers was white, I would have been 3 times as mean. In all seriousness, I
think you're right. Like I don't dispute.
Oh no! Don't get me wrong. I'm fully aware of the optics of a white guy like me talking with a black woman about a subject like that in the terms that I generally do. You know, it's unfortunate. I look, to be more serious. I don't try to be uncharitable with folks. I really do try. I understand that I'm kind of swimming uphill a little bit here, because obviously charitability is reflexive and it's reciprocal. If a person isn't extending charitability to you, you should probably reconsider extending charitability to them in the context of the discourse that you engage in, because they're signaling the tone that you want their arguments to have. I mean, if a person comes on stream and they're just calling you racial slurs or whatever, you can try to, fairly parse out their point, but, obviously it's a little bit more expedient and probably a little bit more fair as well to just sort of do whatever is fun and whatever works for you. I don't want to think less of people in the online left, you know, um, because it's a community that, whether they like it or not, I'm very much a part of. But I feel like there is such an either an unwillingness or an inability to ever meet me in my terms, My opposition to Professor Flowers has been characterized in many ways. That I'm a white supremacist, that I like bullying other online content creators, that I'm cruel to people, that I'm a grifter, but I have never seen a person who dislikes me framing it in the only way that's actually true. I just don't like ethnic cleansing. No matter whether or not you disagree with me or what, that is ultimately the only reason that conversation took place. The only thing that we really split on, but it never gets framed that way. And then when other people talk about this stuff, they make absolutely no effort to endear themselves to my opinion, in large part because they probably think it's a futile effort. They can say, in their minds, anything, but I'm ultimately just an evil clout chaser. So, their placations would be meaningless.
Oh.
If anything, it would be a sign of weakness on their part for them to engage in nuance which acknowledges that I'm correct, because it would be seen as them being, sort of unnecessarily placating. FD Signifier does this, for example. The idea that white people and colonizers are the same thing is academically indefensible. It cannot be defended. But I know what's going on in their minds. They know that. They're not stupid. I know FD Signifier ain't stupid. They understand that. But they also know, and this is kind of a broader cultural thing on the left, the idea of being sort of, conciliatory to a white guy in order to reassure him that you're not racist against white guys is a little pastiche. It's like, okay, really? Do we need to do that? And in a vacuum, I'd agree. The idea of expecting black content creators to, go out there and prove to the white guy that they're not anti-white racist, yeah, that's pretty fucking stupid. But we're not operating in a vacuum here. We're operating in a context where I had a 3-hour conversation talking about ethnic cleansing, and I'm getting condemned for it over, sort of tangential, if not completely unrelated reasons. And now they're in a bind. They can't be conciliatory or even correct, because correctness in this case would be conciliatory. It would be a deviation from the easy, mimetic, casual conversation, the kind of casual conversation where people can just say, oh yeah, whites are racist, oh yeah, white colonizers, haha. It's language I'm comfortable engaging in casually, but in a serious sense, not. And they can't separate it now. They can't. So as long as they can't do that, I have nothing to bite onto with regards to charitability.
Vaush, do you recall that initial conversation we had? I was telling you that your appraisal of the Doomer politics at the time, video against you was spurious and that you conceded too readily.
Yes.
Now, I'm presuming prior to that you actually did watch at least a few minutes of it, yes?
Well, yeah. I watched the whole thing off stream.
Yeah. You were incorrect about that. You misread your own argumentation, and you misread it in an uncharitable way. You allowed for a grossly spurious accusation against your character to stand, despite the fact that these were words from your own mouth that you were able to see in front of you. In fact, horrifyingly, in my initial conversation with Doomer, you can see that I didn't actually read it that way yet either. I realized in the course of that conversation, for example, that hang on, these two definitions of white supremacy in your conversation with what's his name, Lesser Sargon, were not equivalent, and that he was equivocating between the two. Just consider the possibility that this has happened elsewhere. That is all. I'm not going to argue against your interpretation anymore. We've dug that into the ground. I disagree, but whatever.
We have well and truly hit Minecraft bedrock. If we glitch through one block, we're falling down through the skybox.
I'm not even going to argue with respect to that video in particular. I'm just saying, like, bear that in mind, because our every party to this conversation has proved severe, and of course everyone's going to say agree to me on this point now, has proved historically severe limitations on their ability to make fine-grained distinctions between terms in real time. Okay, for whatever reason. I realize you were probably just exhausted by the idea that you weren't really paying attention. It's like, fucking whatever. Like, there's a reason why you didn't watch it on stream initially. It's because you don't want to give this guy validation. I get that.
The reason why is because I knew I never was going to agree with you. I saw your arguments. You have to. So the Doomer Media. I'm sorry. I thought you were talking about the first Professor Flowers video. No, my apologies.
No. Yeah, that's all. That would be my.
No. Those are fine videos. Look, no, I don't disrespect you. I mean, I'll be perfectly clear.
Likewise.
Huh?
I said likewise. I rather like your stuff.
Well,
I think you probably have the best character of anybody. I mean, at your level, like, let's not go nuts. I know
now the
some
best
people
hair,
who don't play
you know. Of course.
I don't know, man. Like, I haven't cut it for a little while, but just watch out.
No, you have a good cut. Look, I don't understand the sovereignty thing. I mean, I understand the argument. I don't understand why you believe what you believe. It feels like a mind parasite to me. But even though we have that disagreement, and hopefully I guess this can be sort of a formative lesson to people in my audience, even though we have that disagreement, the way in which you frame your arguments is consistently appreciated and intelligent. So a disagreement is ultimately not anywhere near as important as the logic by which you arrive at it, or at least the processes by which you engage in that logic. That's sort of the more important. I would definitely trust a person who disagrees with me on a lot but has a good process than a person who agrees with me on everything but is, one spurious photon hitting a brain cell away from, having a completely different take on an issue.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I'll return the favor for whatever that's worth. I think, and I mean, like, it's weird talking to you in this way, because, like, I'm not just talking to a streamer, I'm talking to, like, a pole in the weird kind of political geography of this godforsaken media space. But I think, juxtaposed to other people of your stature, I think you've been incredibly humane with respect to how you've dealt with, pending certain notable exceptions. We disagree on those. I think you've been incredibly humane and charitable with respect to how you have dealt with people in the space who have contested with you in a way that is not mirrored by, say, channels like Destiny, etc. I commend you for that, and I do appreciate the level of generosity and honesty it took to even have this conversation in the first place.
Yeah, I'm glad we had it publicly instead of privately. If for no other reason than because
it's actually not have been fun. I think that was a bad idea.
Oh, wasn't it? Oh no, I would have. I actually have no patience for conversations offline, so I probably would have been fairly disengaged. An unfortunate consequence of the whole live streaming thing now is that anytime I'm sitting in front of my mic talking to somebody, I feel like if my camera's not on, there's like it's like sort of no point. But that's my own brain worm to deal with. I am over. Hit me up. I'm over time on this stream, and I haven't even done the segments that I promised my editor. So.
Oh God, I am so sorry. If you want to get a sense of where I'm coming from in this argument, and this is actually something that has much wider purchase than you would think talking to most people on the street, but there are a lot of people, again, who are taking cues from the literature on this, even at several levels of remove. And I would include Professor Flowers in this, even if she doesn't necessarily know exactly where her logic is coming from. If you just want to understand that, my recommendation would be to look into, there's a literature on the concept of sovereignty in political science. I would look into authors like Wendy Brown, Carl Schmitt, who of course is a Nazi, so the optics there are great. And, Max Weber, Radhika Mongia, who wrote a book called Indian Migration and Empire, is extraordinarily informative. I made a video based on that. Don't look at that. Get the book instead. It's better. That's all I would say. Like, there is a tradition here that is being invoked. It is not intuitive to most people, but it is intuitive to a lot of people. So I would urge taking a glance in that direction.
All right. I am of course illiterate, so I will try to find a tweet thread that contains the relevant information.
I will try to generate one. You have a good night, Vaush. Thank you very much for your time.
Take care.